What kind of miner wakes up after being crushed to death, still gripping a rune pickaxe beneath two impossible suns? Park Dohan does not scream, because the darkness around him smells like work, and the rock is already calling his name. And now he stands in the darkness of a stone shaft, safe and sound, and realizes that this is definitely not his world. The darkness smells of sulfur and wet iron. Park Dohan opens his eyes and sees nothing. Absolute darkness. His back rests on cold stone. Sharp edges dig into his shoulder blades. He takes a deep breath and coughs from the dust. The air is thick and heavy. That's how it smells deep underground. He knows this smell better than the smell of his own home. His arms work. His legs are working. His ribs are intact. He feels himself from chest to knees and finds not a single fracture. And that's not right. The last thing left in his memory is tons of rock above him and the crunch of his own body beneath it. He's dead. He knows this as surely as he knows the difference between shale and sandstone. But the dead don't cough from dust. Dohan sits down. His head is spinning. He reaches out his hand to the right, and his fingers bump into wood. A handle. He grabs it and lifts it. A pickaxe, crooked, heavy. The metal of the blade is smooth and cold, and grooves run beneath his fingers. Patterns or letters. He can't make them out in the dark. The pickaxe lies next to him so perfectly, as if someone had placed it there just for him. He stands up. His knees are shaking, but holding him up. He grabs the handle and out of habit strikes the wall just to test his hand. Just to get a feel for the rock. The blow comes out sharp, too strong as always. Over the past 6 years, he's broken so many handles that the crew stopped counting them. The pickaxe sinks into the stone with a ringing sound, and shards fly off in all directions. And then a voice sounds, steady, calm, female. Not from outside, but right inside his skull. The stroke of luck is activated. Experience is doubled. The chance of a rare find is doubled. The strength of his hands is doubled. Don't break the log, Dohan freezes. He slowly pulls out the pickaxe and looks at the point of impact. Even in total darkness, he sees it. A thin line glints in the stone. Gold. A vein as thin as a hair from a single blow. In his past life, he used to shatter the handles because he struck too hard. They nicknamed him Trash Pack, not for his work, but for his hands. And now his strength has doubled. That means he'll break them twice as often. And in the darkness, for the first time in a long while, he smiles. His eyes adjust to the gloom. He stands at the bottom of a stone shaft. The walls rise dozens of meters upward. A faint light seeps in from above. Not daylight, greenish. He runs his hand along the wall and immediately understands. Tool marks. Someone had struck here. Before. Long ago. A very long time ago. The chips are old, smooth by time. But the pattern of the blows is clearly visible. Who? Someone chiseled this pipe from top to bottom methodically. With a force no human could possess, each chip is as deep as a palm. He looks at the pickaxe, then at the wall. The grooves on the blade are the same size as the chips in the stone. This rock was struck with this pickaxe 1,000 years ago or yesterday. The pickaxe fits the wall like a key fits a lock. Okay. He says this out loud, and the sound travels up the pipe. If this is hell, it looks familiar. If this is heaven, God has a peculiar sense of humor. He surveys the floor. The area is about 5 meters across. A narrow passage darkens in one wall. A person could squeeze through if they bent over. There's a draft coming from there. Weak, but there's a draft. That means a way out. He learned the first rule of a miner on his first day at the open pit mine. If there's a draft, there's a way out. Follow the air. He goes. The passage stretches for 300 meters. He walks hunched over and counts his steps. A habit underground. Counting steps is the only map. The rock changes. At first, it's the same as in the pipe, then darker and denser. He picks at the wall with his fingernail, rubs the crumbs, sniffs, iron ore, rich 40%. In his world, corporations would be fighting over ore like this. Further on, the rock lightens and sparks of light flash within it, tiny like stars inside the rock. He's never seen a mineral like this before. He chips off a piece with a single precise blow. The voice is silent, apparently. The ability doesn't always work. The fragment lands in his palm. Warm. Stones underground are always cold, but this one warms his hand as if it were alive. He slips it into his pocket. He'll figure it out later. The passage climbs upward. The air grows fresher. It smells of earth and wet grass. Close. He picks up the pace. The passage narrows and he has to crawl. The rocks scrape his shoulders. He pushes the pickaxe in front of him, and suddenly the walls give way. He tumbles out of the hole in the hillside and falls face first into the mud. Light hits his eyes. Real daylight. He squints and lifts his head. A valley lies before him. Wide brown grass and the first snow. Wooden houses stand in the distance. About 13 of them. Smoke rises from the chimneys. People move between the houses. He looks up at the sky, and the sky isn't his. 2 suns. One big and dim. The other is small and bright. They hang side by side like 2 eyes. He stares at them for a long time, then at his hands, dirty, scraped, but they are his hands, his calluses. He grips the pickaxe and stands up. 2 suns, a voice in his head. Cold from a single blow. Rock he doesn't recognize. It all comes together. He's no longer in Taebaek. He's no longer in his own world. And most likely he's no longer alive in the old sense. Fine, he says quietly to himself. They gave him a tool, so there's work. He heads down toward the village. The mud squelches under his feet. He's wearing rags of an unfamiliar cut, not his clothes. He doesn't think about that. People first, questions later. The first thing that catches his eye up close are the mine dumps. Mountains of waste rock. He stops and looks at them with a professional's eye. The dumps are huge and unsorted. The ore was dumped into a pile along with the waste rock. No system at all. He picks up a rock. Poor iron ore, about 15%. Next to it, another piece richer, about 30%. They were dumped together. No one sorted them. He shakes his head and walks on. A man is standing by the first house. He's a big guy, leather apron, a face like a rock. He looks at him without surprise. Apparently, vagrants aren't a rarity here. One approaches and stops 3 steps away. They're both silent. He speaks first. He asks where he is. The man answers, "This is Teddori, a mining settlement on the edge of the Grey Fault. Is there any work?" The man snorts. "There's no work. The vein ran dry 2 months ago. The Greyhammer Guild is about to shut down. People are scattering. Who needs a miner without a mine? Who's in charge here? Foreman show. The house with the red roof. But he shouldn't go. The foreman is angry. The last crew left yesterday. He thanks him and heads for the red roof. Foreman show is a short, stocky man in his 50s. His gray hair is in a bun. Tired eyes. He sits at a table in an empty hall and stares at the wall. In front of him is a piece of paper with a stamp. Don't enters and bows. The foreman looks him over. A ragged man with a crooked pickaxe. Dirty. No belongings. No papers. Who is he? A miner. Where from? From far away. Do you have a guild badge? No. The foreman sighs. There's no work. The vein is dead. Work face number 7 of the 3rd Brigade has been declared empty. In a month, the guild will close. He can't feed another mouth. Dohan listens in silence. Then he drops a single sentence. He wants to look at work face number 7 just to look. If he finds nothing, he'll leave and won't get in the way. If he finds something, they'll talk. The foreman stares at him intently. Something's off about this guy. It's not arrogance. It's not desperation. It's calmness. The calmness of a man who knows exactly what he's capable of. The foreman waves his hand. Go. Shaft 7, 3rd tunnel to the left. The ladder's rotten. Take the lantern at the entrance. Dohan takes the oil lantern and descends. The ladder really is wobbly. The steps are rotten. There's no railing. He counts. 48, 12 meters deep, shallow. In his world, this is a trench, not a mine. 3rd tunnel to the left, a narrow opening. The support is old and wooden. He grimaces. The posts are crooked. The cross beams are sagging. There's no lock between the post and the cross beam. In his world, they'd revoke your license for support like this. But here they've been working with it for years. He reaches a dead end, a rock wall. He sets down his lamp and places his palm on the stone. Cold. He taps the wall with his knuckles from left to right, top to bottom. Hollow, 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 and suddenly something slightly different, barely noticeable on the right. Right at the floor. He crouches down and shines the light. The rock here is slightly darker, slightly denser. He strikes once right at that spot. A voice sounds. The stroke of luck is activated. The strength in his hands doubles. The rock cracks. Shards fly in all directions. He shines the light into the crack and freezes. A vein thin, but a vein. It runs at an angle. Not horizontally like the previous crews were drilling, about 40 degrees to the northeast. 3 crews were hammering straight into the wall. In front of them, no one thought the vein ran downward into the side. In his world, every first-year mining student knows that. No one here knows. He sits in the face for 40 minutes, taps out every meter, examines the rock, finds 3 spots where the vein comes close to the surface, memorizes everything, climbs back up, covered in dust with a handful of rocks in his fist. The foreman is sitting there. Dohan places the rocks on the table. This isn't a dud. There is a vein there. It runs at a 40 degrees angle to the northeast, 3 meters from the last test pit. The previous crews were drilling in the wrong place. He needs 3 men in 2 weeks. If he lies, let them cut off his hand. If he doesn't, he'll lose 10% of the vein. The foreman looks at the rocks, then at the guy, then back at the rocks. He picks up a piece and turns it between his fingers. 30 years in the mine. He can tell the rock isn't empty. He just doesn't understand how this ragged kid found in 40 minutes what 3 crews couldn't find in 2 months. How does he know about the angle? The rock speaks if you know how to listen. The foreman is silent for a long time. Then he stands up. He'll give him 3 men, the very last ones, the ones with nowhere else to go, and 2 weeks. If you lie, they won't just chop off your hand, just kick you out into the cold. The executioner left last month. Dohan nods. He needs a place to sleep. Any place. And food. Any food. He'll start tomorrow at dawn. The sergeant leads him to the barracks, a long empty building with a dozen bunks. 9 are empty. An old man is sleeping on the 10th. Dohan collapses onto the nearest bunk. The mattress is thin and smells musty. He puts the pickaxe next to it. He closes his eyes. 2 sons, a voice in his head. A vein at a 40 degrees angle, a dying settlement, a foreman who gave up. A pickaxe with runes from the bottom of a stone pipe. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know why he's here. He doesn't know whose voice promises him a double. But one thing he knows for sure. There is ore beneath this village, and he knows how to get it. That's enough. First the ore, then the questions. He falls asleep with his hand on the pickaxe handle. At dawn, Dohan was already standing at the mine entrance. The air was cold. Snow was falling in fine flakes. 3 workers arrived half an hour later. The first was Namsu, a thin man in his 40s with sunken cheeks and hands that trembled from constant malnutrition. The second was Hojin, young, maybe 20, maybe younger, broad-shouldered, but with the empty gaze of a man who doesn't believe tomorrow will be better than today. The third was Pei, just by, an old man in his 60s, the very one who had been sleeping in the barracks, one with a cough that never stopped. Dohan looked at them. They looked at him. No one expected anything good. Namsu asked if it was true that he had found a vein in the 7th. Dohan replied that it was true. Hojin asked why the 3 teams hadn't found it. Then Dohan replied that they had been digging in the wrong direction, but didn't ask anything. He just coughed and picked up his pickaxe. Dohan nodded. All right. He said that before going down, they would do something. He asked Hojin to bring for long logs. He asked Namsu to find a rope, a strong one, about 20 meters. He asked Bai to sit down and catch his breath. They looked at him as if he were crazy. A miner asking for logs and a rope before going down instead of grab a pickaxe and climb down. But they didn't argue. An hour later, everything was ready. Dohan went down first. The other 3 followed him. He led them to face number 7 and set up a lamp. Then he did something no one in Teddori had ever seen before. He began setting up a support. A proper support, not crooked sticks propped up with stones, a strut frame to post a top beam. A lock. He showed Hojin how to cut a groove at the end of a log. He showed Namsu how to set a post at the right angle. He showed Bai how to drive a wedge between the top beam and the roof. It worked for 3 hours. Dohan didn't touch the face. He was setting up the support, for frames one after another. For the first time in its entire history, face in the whole number 7 had a proper roof. Namsu touched the roof and shook his head. He said that in 20 years in the mine, he had never seen support installed like this. Dohan replied that it wasn't magic, it was engineering. He explained the principle. The rock presses down from above. The support distributes the pressure onto the post. The struts transfer the pressure to the ground. If the angles are correct, the frame holds 10 times more than a stick propped up by a rock. Namsu listened with his mouth agape. Then Dohan walked up to the face. He pointed out the crack from yesterday's blow. He indicated the vein's direction. He explained. The vein runs down and to the right at an angle. They wouldn't be striking straight into the wall like those before them had done. They would be cutting the rock in steps. Each step half a meter following the vein, and on each step a new support frame. Dohan picked up a pickaxe. He stood in front of the wall. He took aim and struck. A voice in his head. The stroke of luck activated. The rock split cleanly. Dohan struck with precision, every blow in the right spot. He wasn't just hammering at the wall like the local miners did. He worked like a surgeon. 3 blows, pause, inspection. 2 blows, pause, inspection. The rock fell away in layers. Half an hour later, the vein was exposed just a palm's width wide. Dark metal glinted in the lantern light. Iron. Good iron. Hojin stepped closer and whistled. He said that Chun's crew had been chiseling at this wall for a month and found nothing. Dohan replied that Chun's crew was chiseling at the wall. He, however, was chiseling at the vein. The difference lay in a single word and 3 meters of direction. They worked until evening. Dohan set the schedule: 2 hours of work, half an hour of rest. Mandatory. Namsu said that in Teddori miners work until they drop. Dohan replied that in Teddori miners die until they drop. Now things would be different. During breaks he made them drink water, eat, stretch their arms. I watched him out of the corner of his eye and said nothing. By the end of the first day, they had cut out 3 steps. The vein was widening. Dohan could tell by the rock. With every meter they went deeper. The tunnel wall grew thicker. He didn't say it out loud. It was too soon. Let there be results first. On the second day, Dohan did one more thing. He found a scrap of wood and a piece of coal, and he began to keep a record. He wrote down how much rock they had hauled out yesterday, how much of it was ore, how much was waste, how many hours they worked, how many hours they rested. He hung the board on the wall at the entrance to the tunnel. Namsu read it and asked what it was for. Dohan explained it was a record. They needed to know how much they hauled up each day. Not by eye, not a lot or a little. Exact figures, kilograms, because when the time comes to divide the share, everyone must see their contribution, not based on the boss's word, based on the record. Namsu was silent for a long time. Then he said that in 20 years, no one had ever told him how much he'd hauled. He just worked and received a bowl of porridge at the end of the day. Dohan replied that a bowl of porridge for 20 years without a single figure isn't payment. It's feeding livestock. From this day on, things will be different. By the 5th day, things were getting serious. High-grade iron ore. Dohan estimated its grade at 35 to 40%, based on color and weight. For this world, that was wealth. They hauled the ore up in buckets on a rope. Dohan did the math and realized they needed a winch or at least a pulley. The simplest pulley. A log, a handle, a rope, a drum. He sketched a diagram on the ground at the mine entrance. Hojin looked at the drawing and couldn't figure out what it was. Dohan explained. You turn the handle, the log rotates, the rope winds up, the bucket rises. Instead of hauling 20 kilograms on a rope with your hands, you lift 50 kilograms with one hand. Hojin said that was impossible. Dohan said it was a lever. And he built the winch in 2 days using whatever he could find in the village. An old log, an iron pin from a broken cart, a rope. When the winch started working, Hojin stood nearby and watched as the bucket of ore rose to the surface. From the rotation of the handle, he turned the handle with one hand. The bucket weighed 40 kilograms. Dohan asked him what he thought. Hojin replied that he thought Dohan was a shaman. Dohan replied that he was an engineer. It was almost the same thing, only without the hat. By the 9th day, pit number 7 had yielded its first ton of pure iron in 6 months. Dohan knew it wasn't pure. It required processing. But for Teddori, it was a miracle. Foreman Cho came to the dump and stared at the pile of ore for a long time. Then he looked at the logbook. Then at Dohan, he asked, how much was there? Dohan answered precisely. 1,120 kilograms of ore with an average iron content of 37%. Processing it would yield about 400 kilograms of metal. At the market in the nearest town, that's worth 12 silver coins per 100 kilograms. A total of 48 silver coins, minus expenses for tools and food, net profit of about 40. Foreman Cho was silent. 40 silver coins in 9 days. His best crew in their best days made that much in a month, and that's without any accounting. On the 10th day, life changed. Dohan struck the rock and the voice in his head sounded different. Luck strike activated. Chance of a rare find doubled. Critical find. The rock cracked and something white glinted from beneath it. Not iron. Dohan carefully cleared away the debris. Silver. A vein of silver ran through the iron vein like a thread through a rope. Dohan sat down on the floor of the tunnel and stared for a long time at the white glint. In the light of his lantern, silver in a village dying of poverty. On the 13th day, the silver vein was fully confirmed. It was thin but stable. Dohan carefully exposed 5 meters of it and documented every chime, direction, thickness, depth, grade. He recorded all of this on boards with charcoal. The first silver vein in the history of Teddori. Namsu sat by the wall of the tunnel face and said nothing. Hojin was silent, too. I coughed and spoke for the first time in 2 weeks. He said, well, just well, but that word said it all. 20 years of barren rock. 30 years of empty promises and suddenly silver. Dohan climbed back up. He dusted himself off. He placed a piece of silver ore in front of Foreman Cho. The foreman took it. He turned it over. He looked at Dohan. He stood up from the table. He walked out of the house, circled it, came back, sat down. He said that in 30 years there had been no silver in this village. In 30 years. He asked who Dohan was, where he was from, how he had found what hundreds of miners before him had failed to find. Doan answered simply. He was a scrap miner from another place. He didn't know how to do anything special. He just listened to the rock. Foreman Cho looked at him for a long time, then he nodded. He said, 10%. As agreed. And that's starting tomorrow. Doan would get his own plot. His own, with the right to hire people and conduct mining on behalf of the Grey Hammer Guild. Doan bowed. He stepped out of the foreman's house and stood on the threshold. Snow was falling on Teddori. Quiet white snow. People walked between the houses. Someone was carrying firewood. Someone was repairing a fence. An ordinary day in a dying village. Only the village was no longer dying. He didn't know that yet, but Doan knew. Beneath his feet lay a silver vein and iron and maybe something else, because the vein went deeper. And with every meter deeper, it grew richer. Doan took out of his pocket that piece of strange warm rock. He picked up in the passage from the fault. He turned it over in his fingers. The shimmering dots inside the stone glowed with a dim greenish light. He didn't know what it was. Not yet, but he knew one thing. If the rock was warm, it meant there was something beneath it, something alive. He put the stone back in his pocket and headed to the barracks. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Doan spent his first month in Teddori underground. He went down at dawn and came up after sunset. The silver vein turned out to be longer than he thought. It stretched 20 meters deep and showed no sign of ending. Doan followed it like a surgeon guides a scalpel along an incision line carefully, precisely. Not a single unnecessary strike. Every kilogram of rock was accounted for. Every gram of silver was recorded. His crew had grown to 5 people. 2 more had joined Namsu Hojin and Bae Kang, a former farmer whose fields had been scorched by drought, and who had come to Teddori because he had nowhere else to go. And Moonhee, a woman, 35 years old, the widow of a miner who died in a cave-in last year. When she came to apply for a job, Namsu said they didn't hire women in the mine. Doan asked why. Namsu said that was just the way it was. Doan asked, established by whom? Namsu didn't know how to answer. Doan gave Moonhee a pickaxe and put her to work sorting or upstairs. Within a week, she was sorting faster than anyone else. She had keen eyes. She could distinguish the ore's grade by color almost as well as Doan. He noticed this and transferred her to her grading. She assessed the quality of every bucket brought up and recorded it in a log. Doan issued the first buy slip at the end of the 3rd week. He gathered all 5 of them. He sat down at the table. He laid out the records and began to read. Namsu 20 shifts work. For 120 kilograms of ore, Hall share of the sale, 3 silver and 20 copper. Hojin 18 shifts 380 kilograms, exactly 3 silver coins. Bae 14 shifts to 110 kilograms to silver coins. Gangtai 12 shifts 180 kilograms, 1 silver and 40 copper. Moonhee 20 shifts sorting and grading 1,000 to 100 kilograms of ore to silver and 60 copper. He placed the coins on the table in front of each person in each stacks. Namsu looked at his stack and didn't take it. Doan asked what was wrong. Namsu replied that in 20 years, this was the first time anyone had told him how much he had mined and how much it was worth. He didn't know what to do with it. Doan said it was his money. He had earned it. Every coin was backed by a record. Let him take it. Namsu took the coins. His fingers were trembling, not from the cold. Hojin grabbed his right away, silently, firmly, but took his slowly. He counted them. He nodded. Kang stared at the coins for a long time. Then he said quietly that with this money he could buy seeds by spring, that he could return to the land. Doan replied that he could, but if he stayed, in 3 months he would buy not seeds, but an entire field. Kang stayed. Moonhee took her coins and left in silence. That evening, Doan saw her by the well. She was washing her son's clothes. A little boy of about 5 sat nearby on a rock in new boots. Doan said nothing. He turned away and went home. The pay stubs changed everything. 2 days after the first payment, 3 more men came to Doan. Miners who had left a month ago and had now learned that there was silver in the 7. They wanted to return. Doan said he would take them all, but on his terms: support, record keeping, schedule, rest. By stubs, anyone who didn't agree could look for work elsewhere. All 3 agreed. By the end of the first month, the crew had grown to 8 people. Face number 7 was yielding or consistently silver, iron. Doan began thinking about the next step. Ore is good, but ore sold is his money lost on waste rock. In his world, he had seen how processing plants worked. He had seen crushers and washing tables and centrifuges. He couldn't build a centrifuge out of wood and stone, but crusher he could, and a washing trough he could. He started simple. He found a flat stone, a big one, a heavy one. He hewn it into the shape of a trough. He placed a second stone next to it, a smaller one, to serve as a mortar. They crushed the ore by hand, stone by stone. Then they washed it in the trough with water from the stream. The heavy silver settled to the bottom, the light, worthless rock washed away with the water. Primitive, slow. But the result amazed even Dohan. The ore that Teddori had been selling for scrap was worth 5 times as much after washing. The silver content in the washed concentrate was 4 times higher than in the raw ore. Foreman Cho came to look at the trough and was silent for a long time. Then he asked why no one had thought of this before. Dohan replied that anyone could have thought of it. It was just that no one had tried. Everyone was used to selling the ore as is. That's how their fathers did it. That's how their grandfathers did it. Why change it? Foreman Cho nodded. He said that was true. That's how their grandfathers did it, and their grandfathers got pennies and their grandsons got even less. He asked what else Dohan could do. Dohan replied that he could do a lot, but he needed materials. Wood, iron, leather, and blueprints. The foreman asked him what kind of blueprints. Dohan replied that he would draw them himself. He needed paper. The foreman laughed for the first time in a long while. He said that paper in Teddori was more expensive than silver. Dohan replied that it wouldn't be for long. In the second month, Soren arrived. Dohan didn't know then that this day would change everything. He was standing at the mine entrance counting buckets of ore when a figure appeared on the road. A woman, young, in a tattered cloak, short hair, a smudge of soot on her right cheek. She was carrying a roll of something that looked like paper under her arm, and looked as if she hadn't eaten in 3 days. She approached the first person she saw. It was Hojin. She asked where she could sell some blueprints. Hojin looked at her in bewilderment. What blueprints? She unrolled the bundle. Dohan saw it out of the corner of his eye and stepped closer. It was a diagram on the paper. He stared at it, and his breath caught in his throat. A winch. A mine winch with a gearbox with a brake with a cable tensioning system. The drawing was flawless. The lines were crisp. The dimensions were marked. The materials were labeled. It was the work of a professional. Dohan looked at the woman. She was looking at him. Her eyes held equal parts pride and hunger. She said the drawing was worth 2 silver coins. Dohan replied that it was worth 6. She fell silent. He repeated himself. 6 silver coins. And if she agreed not only for the drawing, but also for her to build this winch herself. So Ren, that was the name she gave, a former student of the Imperial Academy of Machinery. Expelled in her 5th year with the explanation that a woman cannot keep the formula for torque in her head. Dohan listened to this and made no comment. He said one thing. He needed a winch. She knew how to build winches. Nothing else mattered. So, Ren stood before him, not knowing what to say. For the past 2 years, she had traveled from town to town selling her blueprints for food. No one bought them. No one wanted blueprints from a woman, especially not from a woman who had been expelled from the academy. And now here stands a dirty miner in a small village at the edge of the world offering 3 times what she asked for, and not for a piece of paper for work. She asked where she would live. Dohan pointed to the barracks. She asked where she would work. Dohan pointed to the area by the mine entrance. She asked when to start. Dohan said right now. So, Ren spent a week building the winch. Dohan assigned Hojin and Kang Tai. She commanded them like a general, tough, precise, no unnecessary words. On the 3rd day, Hojin told Dohan that this woman was scarier than any cave-in. Dohan replied that it was a compliment. The winch was assembled on the 7th day. A wooden frame, an iron shaft, a leather belt, a brake lever, a drum with a cable. So Ren checked it for half a day, tightening, adjusting, lubricating, then she nodded, done. Dohan tied a bucket of ore to the rope, 80 kilograms. So, Ren stood behind the lever. She turned it. The bucket went up smoothly, easily. Dohan timed it 30 seconds. Before they used to lift the bucket by hand in 5 minutes. And it weighed half as much. Productivity had tripled in a single day with a single winch. Dohan turned to So-Ren. She was standing next to the machine looking at it the way a mother looks at a child who has taken their first step. Dohan said he needed a nameplate. So Ren asked what kind. Dohan said there should be a plaque on the winch with the name of the person who built it. So Ren, master engineer. So Ren didn't answer. She turned away and silently went back to her barracks. Hojin said she was probably offended. Dohan replied that she wasn't. She's crying and she doesn't want anyone to see. The next day, the winch was hanging on the winch. So Ren, master engineer to Teddori mine, winch number 1. Dohan nailed it up himself with nails straight. So, Ren saw the plaque in the morning and stood in front of it for 10 minutes. Then she came to Dohan and said she had more blueprints, a crushing table, a ventilation duct, a water pump. Dohan said he needed everything. So, Ren asked on what terms. Dohan replied, 10% of the increase in productivity that her machines provide for life. With a record in the ledger. So Ren looked at him. Then she asked quietly if he was serious. Dohan replied that he was always serious when it came to numbers. By the end of the second month, the Teddori mine was unrecognizable. The winch was working. A crushing table stood at the entrance. A ventilation duct made of bull hide and wooden frames supplied fresh air to the working face. Support structures stood on every level. Dohan introduced 3 8-hour shifts instead of one endless one. Each shift had a foreman. Every foreman kept a log. Dohan personally checked each logbook every evening. The settlement began to come alive. People were returning, 10 people in the first week, 15 in the second. Rumors of silver and Teddori spread through the region like smoke. Dohan knew this was just the beginning. And he knew that soon it wouldn't just be the neighboring villages that would hear about it. He sat in the bar that evening and looked over his records. So sat nearby. Sketching a new mechanism, they didn't speak. They simply worked side by side. Behind the wall, Pai was coughing. Hojin was snoring. Moon-hee was quietly singing a lullaby to her son. Dohan jotted down the month's totals in his notebook. 12 tons of ore had been mined for 100 G of pure silver, 8 tons of enriched iron. The guild's income was 120 silver coins. Expenses were 40. Net profit was 80 silver coins for the month for Teddori. These were incredible figures. For Dohan, it was just the beginning. He closed the notebook and looked at the pickaxe. It stood against the wall, crooked with runes. Warm to the touch. He still didn't understand what it was, where the voice came from. Why the doubling? But that could wait. Business first, secrets later. The third month began with a blow from the pickaxe that changed everything. Dohan descended to the lower level of face number 7. The silver vein ran deeper and deeper. He followed it day after day, step by step, support beam by support beam. That day, he reached a depth of 30 meters. It was the deepest level in the history of the Teddori mine. The air was heavy despite the soin ventilation shaft. The lamp burned dimly. Dohan stopped in front of the wall and placed his palm on the stone. Warm. The rock was warm, just like that stone from the rift. He tapped the wall. The sound was different. Not hollow. Ringing as if there were a void behind the wall or something denser than ordinary stone. Dohan picked up a pickaxe. He took aim, he struck. A voice in his head. Luck strike activated. A critical find. The stone split open and light poured out of the wall. Bluish, bright. Dohan took a step back and shielded his eyes with his hand. When his eyes adjusted to the light, he saw it. A crystal the size of a fist embedded in the rock. It glowed from within with an even blue light. Warm, alive, a monocrystal. Dohan didn't know that word, but he knew that a warm stone that glows in the dark is valuable in any world. He carefully chipped away at the rock around the crystal, pulled it out, placed it in his palm. The crystal warmed his hand. The light pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Dohan climbed to the surface and showed the crystal to Foreman Cho. The sergeant turned pale. He sat down on a bench and couldn't speak for a long time. Then he said one word, mana. Dohan asked what it was. The sergeant explained, monocrystals are fuel for everything. Lamps, furnaces, weapons, golems, machinery. A single crystal like this goes for 50 gold pieces on the market. 50 gold pieces is the annual income of an average baron. Dohan looked at the crystal, then at the sergeant. He asked how many he estimated were down there. The sergeant said that if there was one, there might be 10. Dohan replied that judging by the rock structure, there weren't 10. There was a vein. A whole vein of monocrystals. Foreman Cho closed his eyes. He sat like that for a minute. Then he opened them and said that Dohan needed to be very careful because if word got out, it wouldn't be merchants who came here. Armies would come here. Dohan nodded. He had already thought about that. Monocrystals aren't silver. Silver attracts attention. Mono attracts war. He told the sergeant that so far only 2 people knew about this, and it would stay that way. They would mine silver and iron openly. That the mono would be moved quietly in small batches through trusted people. The sergeant asked through whom. Dohan replied that he didn't know yet, but he would find out. He returned to the barracks and sat down with his notebook. He needed a plan. A serious plan. Not for a month, for a year, for 2. He wrote until morning. Numbers, diagrams, calculations. How much ore could be extracted in a month? How many crystals could be mined safely? How many people were needed? How much it would cost to build a wall around the mine? How much it would cost to hire security? So Ren came in the morning and saw him at the table. His eyes were red. The notebook was filled with writing. She asked what had happened. Dohan paused. Then he said he had found monocrystals. So Ren dropped the blueprint she was carrying. She picked it up. Her hands were shaking. She asked if there were many. Doan replied that there were many. So Ren sat down next to him quietly. She said that if that was the case, they needed protection. Serious protection, not a fence or a lock. People, weapons, walls? Doan nodded. He knew. But first, something else. First, they had to make sure Teddori became impossible to destroy. Not with weapons, with paper. He explained. In this world, there is a law. If a mine is registered as guild property, and the guild pays imperial taxes, it can only be confiscated by a decision of the imperial court. And court takes time and money and requires evidence. So, the first thing they do is register the guild by the book with a seal, with a charter, with accounting that can't be tampered with. So, Ren asked how he knew imperial law. Don replied that he didn't know, but Foreman Cho did. They called for the sergeant. He confirmed it. Registering the guild costs 10 gold pieces. That's more than Teddori's entire monthly income. But if they sell 3 monocrystals quietly on the black market, it'll be enough. Don shook his head. Not the black market. The black market leaves traces. Traces lead to questions. Questions lead to people with swords. He'll sell the silver leg, openly at market price. A month's work would yield enough silver for registration. Don gathered everyone, 8 workers, including Ren, the foreman. He stood before them and spoke calmly, quietly. He said that from this day forward, the Grey Hammer Guild would become something greater. He proposed a new name, Pickaxe and Notebook. The name was strange. The miners exchanged glances. Doan explained. The pickaxe is their hands, the notebook is their heads. Hands without a head is slavery. A head without hands is idle talk. Together it is strength. Namsu asked why they should change the name. Doan replied that Grey Hammer was a name born in poverty and dying in poverty. Pickaxe and Notebook was a name they would build themselves from day one with a clean slate. Foreman Cho was silent. Then he nodded. He said he agreed. Moon-hee was the first of the workers to agree. Hojin followed her. Bai followed him. Namsu was the last to agree. He said he didn't care what the guild was called. The main thing was that the payroll remained. Doan replied that the payroll would remain forever. This is the first rule of the pickaxe and the notebook. A week later, Foreman Cho traveled to the county seat with a sack of silver and a stack of documents. Doan had spent 3 nights writing these documents, the guild's charter, the membership list, and the financial report for the past 2 months. Every figure was backed up by records. Every entry was dated. When the county registrar opened the folder, he read for an hour. Then he looked up and asked who had written it. The foreman replied that it was the mine foreman. The registrar said that in 20 years of service, he had never seen such accounting from a mining guild. Usually, they bring a dirty scrap of paper with a cross instead of a signature. But here was a complete balance sheet broken down by account. The seal was affixed that very day. The pickaxe and notebook officially existed with all rights, with all the protections of imperial law. Doan received the news that evening when the foreman returned. He took the seal in his hands, heavy bronze with the guild's name. He turned it over in his hands and put it away in the desk. Then he sat down and wrote it in his notebook. The cost of registration was 12 gold pieces, including travel expenses and fees. Season 3. Month 1. The Pickaxe and Notebook Guild established. That same evening, 3 horsemen rode up to the mine. Fine horses, fine clothes, swords at their belts. They dismounted at the entrance and asked who was in charge here. Hojin called for Doan. The leader of the horsemen was a tall man with a slender face and a gold ring on his little finger. He introduced himself as a trade intermediary of the 7 Hammers Guild. Doan recognized the name. The foreman had told him about it. 7 Hammers, the empire's largest mining cartel. They control 80% of the metals market. The broker was polite. He said that the 7 Hammers were interested in collaborating with the young guild. He said that they were ready to buy all of Pickaxe and Notebook production at a good price. 10 silver coins per ton of ore, wholesale. No hassle. Doan listened. Then he asked at what price the 7 Hammers sold or on the market. The broker hesitated. Doan answered for him. 40 silver coins per ton. Doan said that 10 out of 40 is 25%. That's not a partnership, that's robbery. With a polite smile, the middleman stopped smiling. He said that the 7 Hammers offer more than just money. They offer protection, a safety net. Without them, a small guild in a small village won't survive. Doan nodded. He said he understood, and he offered his price. 30 silver pieces per ton. Pick up only with a quality guarantee and a certificate of content. The middleman laughed. He said that the 7 Hammers don't haggle with country folk. Doan replied that Pickaxe and Notebook is not a village guild. It is registered under imperial law. It has a seal and complete accounting records. It can sell or directly to any buyer in the empire without middlemen. He took the seal out of the desk and placed it on the table. Next to it, he placed a copy of the charter. Next to that, a financial report. The middleman looked at the documents. The smile vanished completely. He gathered the papers. He said he would pass on the answer. He mounted his horse and rode off. So, Ren stood by the door and listened. When the writers had disappeared, she approached Juan and quietly said that he had just declared war on the Seven Hammers. Don replied that he hadn't. He had offered a fair deal. They had refused. This wasn't war. It was business. So Ren said that for the Seven Hammers, business and war were one and the same. Don nodded. He knew that too. But there was no turning back. Mona crystals lay at their feet. Silver flowed from the mine face. People were receiving their pay stubs. The city was coming to life. Giving all this up for 10 silver coins per ton was impossible. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Contact with the Seven Hammers Guild. Offer rejected. Expected reaction, pressure. Timeline to weeks to 2 months. Prepare. Walls, documents, supplies. People." He closed the notebook and looked out the window. Snow was falling on Teddori, on the Maynard, on the winch. So with a sign, on the piles of sorted ore, on the foreman's house with the red roof, a small world. Fragile his, not his by birthright, his by right of work, by the right of every pickaxe blow, by the right of every line in the notebook. Dohan stood up and went into the mine. He needed to strike the rock. His multiplier would reset to 0 if he didn't go down into the mine every 3 days. And tomorrow was the 3rd day. He went down. He picked up the pickaxe. He struck. A voice in his head. Luck strike activated. The rock split. A monocrystal fell from the wall and landed in his palm. Warm, blue, glowing. Dohan put it in his pocket. 1 strike, 1 crystal. He smirked in the darkness. A trash miner from Taebaek. In a world where the gods haven't reached the bottom, nothing. He will. The Seven Hammers responded 3 weeks later. Not with swords, not with fire, with paper. An official from the county chamber arrived in Teddori, fat in a silk robe, with 2 assistants and a stack of documents. He introduced himself as the mining inspector. He said a complaint had been filed regarding safety violations of the Pickaxe and Notebook Guild's mine. That under imperial law, he was obligated to conduct an inspection, that mining operations must be suspended during the inspection. Dohan stood before him and listened calmly. He asked who had filed the complaint. The inspector replied that this was confidential information. Dohan nodded. He said that conducting an inspection was the inspector's right, and he invited him into the mine personally. The inspector turned pale. He said that going down into the mine wasn't necessary. A review of the documentation would suffice. Dohan said the documentation was on the table. He opened the notebook. The inspector read for 2 hours. Dohan sat across from him and waited. So, Ren stood by the door and waited as well. The inspector flipped through the pages, the production log, the support log, ventilation diagrams, phase inspection reports, employee timesheets, shift schedules, tool consumption records, depreciation records. The inspector finished reading. He placed the notebook on the table. He looked at Dohan, then at his assistants. The assistants shrugged. The inspector cleared his throat. He said the documentation was in order, that he hadn't seen records like these in 15 years of service, that he had no complaints, that the inspection was over. He gathered his papers and left. At the gate, he turned around and quietly told his assistant that whoever had filed a complaint against this guild was either an idiot or hadn't seen their books. The assistant nodded. Dohan heard that. So, did so Ren. She allowed herself a small smile. The first one ever. Dohan didn't smile. He knew it was a test. The Seven Hammers were testing his defenses. The paperwork attack hadn't worked, so the next one would be tougher. He was right. A week later, the warehouse caught fire at night. Dohan woke up to a scream. He bolted out of the barracks and saw the fire. The warehouse, wooden, old. It burned fast. People ran with buckets. Dohan ran too. He helped put out the fire. He poured water. He hauled sand. By dawn, the warehouse was a black skeleton of charred beams. 20 tons of ore. A month's work. Gone. Namsu stood nearby and stared at the ashes. Hojin sat on the ground and said nothing. Moon he was crying quietly with her hands covering her face. Dohan surveyed the ruins. He found what he was looking for. At the base of the wall, a charred piece of oil-soaked cloth. Arson. He wasn't surprised. He turned to the people and said 3 things. First, the ore is lost. That's bad. Second, no one was hurt. That's good. Third, the new warehouse will be made of stone, and it won't catch fire. Namsu asked, "What kind of stone?" Dohan pointed to the mine dump. Waste rock. Thousands of tons. They'd been dumping it for years. Now it will go into the walls. Dohan sketched the new warehouse all day. Stone walls half a meter thick. A roof of stone slabs on wooden beams. Coated with clay. Ventilation openings under the roof. Iron doors. So Ren added a drainage channel around the perimeter to the design. So water wouldn't flood the foundation. The whole village built it. 2 weeks. They hauled stone from the dumps. Cut it into blocks. Stacked it. Dohan worked alongside everyone else. He hauled stones. He mixed mortar. His hands were covered in blood from the sharp edges. So Ren saw this once and silently brought him gloves, rough ones, leather ones. She said that no one needed a mine for without fingers. Dohan put on the gloves. The new warehouse was completed in 2 weeks. Stone, heavy, sturdy. Dohan moved all the mine ore into it, and the crystals. The monocrystals lay in a separate box. 8 of them. He mined them at a rate of 2 or 3 a week secretly on the lower level. No one but the foreman and So Ren knew. So, Ren found out by accident. She went down to the lower level to check the ventilation and saw Dohan pulling a blue crystal out of the wall. She froze. Dohan turned around. They looked at each other in the blue light. So, Ren asked how long he'd been doing it. Dohan replied since the 3rd month. So, Ren asked why he hadn't told her. Dohan replied that the fewer people who knew, the safer it was. So, Ren was silent for a moment. Then she said she understood, and that now she knew too, and she would keep quiet. But she needed the crystals for a project. Dohan asked what kind of project. So, Ren replied that it was for a man drive. A mechanism that uses crystal energy instead of muscle power. A motor-driven winch would lift not 80 kilograms but 500. Dohan gave her to crystals. No questions asked. The warehouse fire had one more consequence. Dohan realized he needed a guards. Real ones, not Hojin with a stick at the gate. People who know how to handle weapons. And then Yunera appeared. She arrived in the 5th month, not alone. With her were 3 former soldiers from her ruined clan. All in tattered armor, all hungry. Yuna was tall, straight as a halberd shaft, a braid down to her waist, a scar across her eyebrow. She approached Dohan and said she was looking for work, any kind for herself and her people. Dohan asked what she could do. She replied that she knew how to kill. Dohan said that he didn't need anyone to kill. He needed to make sure no one got killed. Era blinked. She hadn't expected that answer. Dohan explained he needed a head of security. Someone to organize security for the mine and the settlement, patrols, guard post, schedules, and travel logs. Era asked what travel logs were. Dohan replied that they were papers listing who went where when, and why. Era said she was a knight, not a scribe. Dohan replied that a knight who doesn't know where his people are isn't a knight. That's a lost knight. Era was silent for a long time. Then she asked how much he was paying. Dohan named a figure. 5 silver coins a month for her. 3 for each of her soldiers plus food plus lodging plus a buy slip. Era asked what a pay slip was. Dohan smiled. He replied that it was a document that says you're not a slave. Era agreed that very same day she moved into the barracks. Her soldiers took up their post. 3 days later, Era came to Dohan with a sheet of paper. On it was the patrol schedule, post, routes, guard change times. Dohan looked at it and nodded. He asked how she knew how to draw up a schedule. Era replied that her family had served the emperor for 1,000 years. She knows everything a soldier knows, but she doesn't know how to fill out paperwork. She's learning, though. Dohan said she was a quick learner. Era didn't answer. That the tips of her ears turned red. Dohan noticed this and said nothing. With Era's arrival, the village became safer. Patrols went out day and night. The 3 soldiers were experienced, battle-hardened. One had lost 3 fingers in combat. Another limped on his left leg. The third was deaf in one ear, but all 3 knew their business. Era drove them like dogs, and they obeyed. Not out of fear, out of respect. She was a knight to the core, strict, fair, silent. Dohan looked at her and thought that in another world, she would be an officer, a good officer. The kind people would follow into the fire. He wrote down the guard expenses in his notebook, and next to it a note. Yunara, head of the guard. Reliable. By the end of the 5th month, Teddori had changed. A stone warehouse stood by the mine. The winch was running. Ventilation supplied air to 3 levels. Guards patrolled the perimeter. The population had grown to 500 people. Rumors of silver and good conditions attracted people from all over the region. Miners came with their families, with children, with wives, with the elderly. Dohan accepted everyone. He found work for everyone. The miners went down into the mine. The wives worked at the soaring facility. The elderly repaired tools. The children carried water. And everyone received a buy slip. Everyone. So, Ren was working on the monodrive. She locked herself in the workshop and didn't come out for 3 days. Don brought her food. He placed a plate by the door. He knocked. He left. An hour later, the plate was empty. He took it away and brought a new one. This happened every day. On the 17th day, So Ren came out of the workshop. Her eyes were red. Her hair was sticking out in all directions. Soot covered both her cheeks. She said 2 words. It works. They connected the monodrive to the winch. The next day, they inserted the crystal into a special slot. So Ren turned the lever. The winch hummed. The cable tightened. A bucket containing 500 kilograms of ore moved upward smoothly, quickly. 20 seconds. The miner stood around and watched in silence. I coughed and said again, well. Namsu took off his cap and scratched his bald spot. Hojin opened his mouth and forgot to close it. Dohan turned to So Ren. She was standing by her machine looking at it with the same gaze like a mother watching her child. Only now the child wasn't walking, but running. Dohan said she needed a new sign, a bigger one. So Ren looked at him. There was something new in her eyes. Not pride, not gratitude, something quieter, something deeper. She replied that she would make the sign herself. And she did. So Ren, Master Engineer, Monodrive Model 1, Pickaxe and Notebook Mine. Dohan nailed it next to the first one. 2 signs, 2 inventions, 1 engineer. He wrote it down in his notebook. The monodrive has been put into operation. Consumption of 1 crystal for 30 days of continuous operation. Lifting capacity increased 6-fold. Project author. So Ren, reward, 5 silver coins. So Ren received the coins and put them in her pocket without counting them. She was already thinking about the next machine. Dohan could see it in her eyes. He didn't interfere. That evening, he sat in the barracks and looked at the notebook. The pages were running out. He had already filled 4 notebooks. Every line represented a day's work. Every number represented someone's life. 500 people. He didn't remember all the names, not yet. But he was working on it. Every evening he reviewed the list, repeated the names, the faces, who could do what, who was sick with what, who had how many children. This was his job, not the pickaxe, not the notebook. People, the pickaxe and the notebook are tools. People are the goal. He closed the notebook. Behind the wall, So Ren was drawing. Era was sharpening a sword. Bai was coughing. Moonhee was singing to her son. Snow was falling on Teddori on the stone warehouse on the winch with the sign on the mine that fed. 500 people. Dohan lay down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be a new day. A new face-off. New names in the notebook. And somewhere deep underground, the pickaxe of the blacksmith god awaited his next blow. The 6th month began with rain. Cold, heavy rain. Water flooded the Menhir and streamed down the tunnels. Dohan stood at the mine entrance and watched the water disappear underground. In his world, this was called a water inflow, and it killed the mines more surely than any cave-in. He descended to the lower level. The water was ankle-deep. On the 2nd level, it was knee-deep. Work phase number 7 was flooded. Work had stopped. Namsu said it was like this every fall. The rains lasted 3 weeks. The mine floods. They wait for the water to drain on its own. Sometimes they wait a month, sometimes 2. Dohan asked how much were they lost during that time. Namsu shrugged. No one had counted. Dohan did the math. At current production rates, 2 months of downtime meant a loss of 60 tons of ore and 20 monocrystals. In monetary terms, that was about 300 silver coins. Plus, the cost of maintaining 500 people who weren't working but were still eating. It was unacceptable. He called for So Ren. She went down to the lower level. She looked at the water. She touched the wall. She sniffed the air. She asked what he was proposing. Dohan explained. Dewatering a system for pumping water out of the mine. In his world, they used electric pumps. There's no electricity here. But there are monocrystals. And there was So Renan, who had already built a monodrive. The principle was the same. The crystal provides energy. The energy turns the mechanism. The mechanism pumps water. We need a pump, a piston pump with valves and a pipe leading up. So Ren listened. Her eyes lit up. She said she knew how a piston worked. She'd seen a diagram at the academy, but they used bronze there, and they don't have bronze. Dohan replied that they have wood and leather, a wooden piston, a leather seal, a cylinder made from a hollowed-out log. Rough, but it works. So Ren nodded. She was already sketching it out in her head. Dohan could see it on her face. She would withdraw into herself when she calculated. Her eyes would glaze over. Her lips would move silently. A minute later, she came back. She said she needed 3 days. Dohan gave her 5. She finished in 2. The pump was ugly. A log with a hollowed-out interior. A piston made of an oak log covered with 3 layers of bull hide. The pump was valve stem, made of thin iron plates. A pipe made of assembled wooden sections wrapped in tarred cloth. The drive turned a crankshaft made of wrought iron that pushed the piston up and down. When they started it up, the miners gathered to watch. So Ren turned the lever. The crystal lit up. The shaft began to rotate. The piston moved, and water gushed from the pipe to the surface. Murky, reddish, smelling of iron. It poured out in a torrent, 20 liters a minute. So Ren stood nearby and counted. An hour later, the flow rate hadn't dropped. After 3 hours, the water level on the lower horizon had dropped by a hand's width. By evening, work face number 7 was dry. Dohan went down. His feet weren't wet. The floor was dry. The walls were damp, but not wet. He ran his hand over the rock. He smiled. He went back upstairs. He walked over to So-ren. She was still standing by the pump, listening to it work, like a doctor listening to a heartbeat. Dohan said she needed a third plaque. So-ren replied that she had run out of space on the wall. Dohan replied that he would build her a new wall. So-ren snorted, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward. It was almost a laugh, the sound closest to laughter he had ever heard from her. It rained for 3 weeks. The Pickaxe and Notebook mine didn't stop for a single day. All the other mines in the area stood flooded. Their workers sat idle and penniless. Word of the prosperity spread quickly. By the end of the rains, the foremen of 3 neighboring mines came to Dohan. Small guilds, poor ones. They asked to buy the pump, or at least the blueprints. Dohan didn't sell. He offered something else, a partnership agreement. Pickaxe and Notebook would provide the pump for free. In exchange, the partner guild would sell, or exclusively through Pick and Notebook at a fair price, with accounting and buy stubs for the workers. The foreman agreed immediately. The third thought about it for 3 days. Then he agreed to. Within a month, Pickaxe and Notebook had transformed from a single mine into a trading hub for 4. Dohan controlled the volume, the quality, the prices all through the Notebook. Teddori's population had surpassed 1,000. New people arrived every day. Families, lonesomes, vagabonds, artisans. A blacksmith named Park Cho set up a forge by the road and began forging tools from local iron. Potter Wong opened a workshop. To women from a neighboring village brought a loom. Teddori was ceasing to be a settlement. It was becoming something bigger. Dohan saw this, and he knew it was time. He convened a council, the first real guild council. Seated at the table were he, Foreman Sho, So-ren Yunera, and Sho Yuna, the chief's daughter. 19 years old, small, quiet, wearing round mountain crystal glasses that Dohan had ordered for her from a traveling glassmaker. When he noticed she was squinting over her books, Yuna kept the guild's ledger, 3,000 entries, every one flawless. Dohan taught her the accounting system himself. She picked it up instantly. Numbers were her language. She thought in numbers just as So-ren thought in mechanisms. Dohan placed a map on the table, a rough one drawn by hand. Teddori in the center, for mines around it, roads, rivers, forest, mountains. He said Teddori needed city status, official with a city charter with the right to walls and a market and a court. Foreman Sho asked why. A village is a village. A city is taxes and obligations. Dohan replied that a village is something that can be burned down overnight. A city is something you have to besiege. The difference isn't in taxes. The difference is in the walls and in the right to build those walls. For a city charter, 3 things are needed. A population of over 1,000, check. A steady source of income, check. And a guarantee from an imperial official of a rank no lower than that of a county magistrate, no. The last point was the problem. The county magistrate was stationed in the city of Gonghai, a 3-day journey away, and he had most likely been bought off by the 7 Hammers. Era said she could go to the magistrate. Her family once had connections at court, and they still remember Yun. Maybe that will be enough. Dohan shook his head. A name without money is just an empty sound, and they don't have the money for a bribe for the judge, and they won't because they don't give bribes. So Ren asked, what then? Dohan replied that the judge isn't the only way. There is another. The imperial auditor. Once a year, the auditor travels through the county and inspects new businesses. If the auditor sees that Pickaxe and Notebook pays its taxes on time and keeps records according to the law, he can issue a city charter without the judge directly on behalf of the treasury. Yuna raised her hand quietly. She said the inspector would be coming in 2 months. She had seen the schedule and the documents the inspector had brought. Everyone looked at her. Yuna blushed and lowered her eyes. Dohan said they had 2 months. During that time, they had to make sure the inspector had nothing to find fault with. Perfect accounting, perfect tax payments, perfect order. Yuna said the accounting was already perfect. Doan looked at her, then at the foreman. He said aloud, Yuna was the best accountant he had ever seen in both worlds. Foreman Cho had raised a master. The sergeant froze, his lips twitched. He looked at his daughter. Yuna sat with her back straight and her ears red. She didn't look up, but her shoulders were squared. The foreman turned away toward the window and was silent for a long time. When he turned back, his eyes were shining. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. 2 months until the auditor. Doan worked like a machine, days in the mine, evenings with his notebook, nights over blueprints. So, Ren was building a second pump for the lower level. Era was training the guards. Yuna was balancing the books. The foreman was managing the people, settling in the new arrivals, distributing food, settling disputes. Amid all this, Doan went down into the mine every 3 days. He struck with a pickaxe. He kept the multiplier. Monocrystals accumulated, 22 of them by the 7th month. He kept them in a locked iron box in the stone warehouse. He wore the key around his neck. By the 7th month, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. He descended to the lowest level, deeper than usual. The face extended 40 meters. The air was hot. The rock glowed. Monocrystals jutted from the walls like teeth. Blue, green, one was red. Doan stopped in front of the red crystal and placed his hand on the rock. Hot, really hot. Like a stove. He struck it with his pickaxe. A voice in his head. Luck strike activated. Critical find. Maximum multiplier. The wall split open, and beyond it was emptiness, a chamber. A large one. Doan squeezed inside. The lantern illuminated the space, a cave the size of a house, the ceiling 5 meters above his head. The walls were studded with crystals, hundreds, thousands. They glowed so brightly that the lantern was no longer needed. But that wasn't what made Doan stop. In the center of the cave stood an anvil, stone, huge, chest high. A hammer lay on it. Not a pickaxe, a hammer. Heavy, black, with runes all over the handle. Next to the anvil, there was a crack in the floor. Deep heat was coming from it, and light, orange, alive. Doan stepped to the edge and looked down. The crack stretched into infinity. Somewhere far below, something was pulsing, hot, powerful, like the heart of the earth. He stepped back. He looked at the hammer, then at his pickaxe. The runes were identical. The inspector had arrived 2 days early. It was an old trick. Show up without warning. Catch them off guard. Catch them red-handed. Doan knew these tricks. At the open pit mine near Tubib, inspectors from the agency would arrive the same way. Early in the morning, without a phone call. The difference was that in Tubib the bosses would hide the violations and are before the inspection. But Doan had nothing to hide. The inspector was a gaunt old man in a black coat with the imperial coat of arms on his belt buckle. His name was Kim Desong. He arrived on horseback alone, no assistants. That meant he was serious. Assistants are needed by those who can't count for themselves. Kim Desong knew how to count. Doan met him at the gate. He bowed. He introduced himself. Mine foreman and head of the Pickaxe and Notebook Guild. The auditor nodded. He asked if he could see the books. Doan led him into the office. A new building stone designed by So Ren, built by Era, furnished by Yuna. Inside it was clean, a desk, chairs, shelves, for notebooks on the shelves, the ledger, the production log, the expense log, the employee roster. Doan placed them in front of the auditor and sat down across from him. Yuna stood nearby with additional records. The auditor opened the first notebook. He read slowly, traced his finger along the lines, checked the numbers. He turned the pages. Sometimes he stopped and went back 3 pages. He cross-checked. An hour later, he opened the second notebook. 2 hours later, the third, 3 hours later, the fourth. Doan sat and waited. He wasn't nervous. He knew every number in those notebooks. Every single one, because he had written them himself. And then Yuna had double-checked them twice. The auditor closed the last notebook. He put his hands on the table. He looked at Doan. A long look. Doan held his gaze calmly. The auditor asked who had taught him to keep records. Doan replied that he had taught himself. The auditor asked where. Doan replied that it was somewhere else, far away. The auditor snorted. He said that in 30 years of service, he had audited for 100 mining guilds. 3 of them kept no records at all. The remaining quarter kept records so poorly that he wanted to wash his eyes out after reading them. But here, he tapped his finger on the notebook. Here there are double entries. Separate accounts by category, tool depreciation, bonus fund by stubs for every worker, including women and the elderly. He said he felt like crying from the beauty of it. Doan replied that there was no need to cry. Better to award a city certificate. The inspector looked at him. Then he laughed. The dry, creaky laugh of an old man who had seen it all and didn't expect to see anything new. He said the certificate required an inspection. Dohan suggested inspecting the mine. The inspector agreed. They went down. The inspector walked slowly. He looked at the support. He touched the post. He tapped the roof beams. Dohan explained. The strut frame. The principle of load distribution, the angle of the struts, the interlocking joints. The inspector listened in silence. On the second level, he saw a pump. He stopped. He watched for a long time as the piston moved up and down and water flowed up the pipe. He asked who had built it. Dohan pointed to the plaque. So Ren, master engineer. The inspector read the plaque. Then he turned to Dohan and asked if it was a woman. Dohan replied that it was. The inspector was silent for a moment. Then he said that the academy had lost more than it thought. They went upstairs. The inspector inspected the winch, the crushing table, the washing troughs, the sorting area, the warehouse, the guard barracks, the office. He saw everything. He counted everything. The same mechanism was at work in his mind as in Dohan's, only slower and from a different angle. By evening, the inspector sat down at a desk in the office and took out a blank sheet of paper bearing the imperial seal. He wrote, "The city of Shin, formerly the village of Teddori, Gimhi County. The charter granting city status is issued based on an inspection and review of documentation. Population 123. Source of income mining. Mayor Master Park Dohan." The pickaxe and notebook. He affixed the seal, signature, date. He handed it to Dohan. Dohan took the charter. He read it. The name Shin, Mu Vain, he hadn't chosen that name. The inspector had chosen it himself. Dohan asked why Shin. The inspector replied that Teddori was the name of a dead place, but this was a living place. Let the name reflect that. Dohan bowed. The inspector gathered his things. Before leaving, he turned around and said one thing quietly. He said that the 7 hammers already knew about the silver, and soon they would find out about everything else. He said that Dohan didn't need to know what everything else meant, but Dohan needed to be ready because a city charter is just a piece of paper and paper burns, unless there are walls and people behind it. Dohan replied that there would be walls and people. The inspector nodded. He mounted his horse. He rode away. Dohan stood at the gate and watched him go. The charter was in his hand. The paper read Shin, a city, his city. He returned to the office. He showed the charter to the council. Foreman Cho read it and sat down in a chair. It was heavy, as if his legs had given out. He said he'd waited 30 years for this day. For 30 years. Teddori had been a hole at the edge of the world. Now it was a city. So, Ren read it and nodded businesslike as if it couldn't be any other way. Era read it and sat up straight. A city means a garrison, a real one with the right to recruit, with the right to walls. She said she would start tomorrow. Yuna read it and began to cry. Quietly, silently, tears streamed down her cheeks behind her glasses. Dohan handed her a handkerchief. She took it and didn't give it back. The news spread within an hour. The whole village, the whole town. People came out of their houses, they stood in the streets. They spoke to one another. Shin, we live in a town. We have literacy. Blacksmith Park Cho struck the anvil with his hammer and bellowed so loudly that birds flew up from the rooftops. Moonhee hugged her son and wept aloud. Namsi stood by the mine and touched the plaque on the winch. Just touched it with his fingers as if checking that it was real. Pa snapped his fingers and said, "Well, the walls were rising slowly. The stone is heavy. There are few people. We don't have enough tools." Dohan drew up a plan every evening. A wall around the city, not the entire perimeter at once. First the manure, then the warehouses, then the residential quarters. Ring by ring, he calculated. The perimeter of the manure is 200 meters. The wall is 3 meters high, half a meter thick. That's 3,000 kubem of stone. 500 people work in the mine. 200 can be assigned to construction. At the current pace, the mine yard will be enclosed by a wall in 2 months, the rest later. A supervised construction. She didn't know anything about engineering, but she knew fortification. Where to place the gates, where to make the embrassers, how to position the wall so that the defenders could fire from the flanks. Dohan looked at her plans and saw 1,000 years of the young clan's military experience. She knew things that could not be taught from books. She knew them in her bones. In the 9th month, she didn't come. She sneaked in the middle of the night through the unfinished section of the wall, past Era's patrol, straight into the stone warehouse. She was looking for monocrystals. Han was a half-blood fox, 21 years old, red hair. To tails she hid under a long cloak. A thief since she was 10, a spy since 15. In the cities, there was a bounty on half-bloods. She lived like a rat in crevices and shadows and other people's pockets. She'd heard about the monocrystals in Shin from a middleman at an in-today's journey from here. The information had leaked. Dohan didn't know where from, maybe from one of the allied elders, Maybe from a merchant who'd seen the glow in the warehouse. It didn't matter. What matters is that Han made her way into the city and got caught. Not by a patrol in a trap. After the warehouse fire, Dohan had laid thin threads of horsehair on the floor of the stone vault. Tied to little iron bells, a simple alarm system. Han touched a thread. The bell rang. Era was at the warehouse within 30 seconds with a sword. Han stood in the middle of the warehouse with a monocrystal in her hand, red-haired, green-eyed, pointed ears to tail sticking out from under her cloak. Era said one word, thief. Han lowered the crystal, slowly placed it on the floor, raised her hands. She wasn't afraid. She was afraid of many things in life, but not swords. Swords were straightforward. Swing, strike, hit or miss. It was simple. Era approached, tied her hands, led her to Dohan. He was sitting in his office. It was midnight. He wasn't sleeping. He never slept before midnight. A notebook, numbers, plans. Era placed Ham in front of the desk and reported. Break-in at the vault, attempted theft of a monocrystal half-breed. Probably a mercenary. Dohan looked at Han. She looked at him. Green eyes, sharp, wary. The eyes of a creature that has spent its whole life waiting for a blow. Dohan asked who had sent her. Ham replied that no one had. She works for herself. Don asked why she wanted the crystal. Ham replied that one crystal fetches 50 gold pieces on the black market. With 50 gold pieces, one can live for 2 years without hiding, without stealing, without fear. 2 years as a human. Don was silent. Ham waited. She waited for him to hand her over to the guards or hit her or order her hand to be cut off. That's what everyone did always. Dohan asked what she could do. Besides stealing, Ham blinked. She hadn't expected that question. She replied that she could sneak around, listen, forge seals, read lips, pick locks, memorize faces, find people who didn't want to be found. Dohan nodded. He said he needed a head of someone who would know what was happening around the city. Who was arriving, who was leaving, what was being said in the taverns, what the Seven Hammers were planning. Han looked at him. She was waiting for a catch, a trap, conditions, physical obligations. It had always been that way. Everyone who offered her a job wanted something else. Dohan stated the terms: 5 silver coins a month, food, a room, a buy slip, freedom of movement. The only requirement, a report once a week, verbal or written, her choice. Ham asked about the crystal she had tried to steal. Dohan replied that the crystal was still there. Nothing was missing, so there was nothing to punish her for. Ham stood before him and said nothing. Her tails trembled beneath her cloak. She didn't understand. She had broken into his vault. She had wanted to rob him, and he was offering her a job. No strings attached, no catch, just a job for money with a buy stub. She asked why. Dohan replied that a person who slipped past Yoon Era's patrol and found a warehouse full of crystals in a single night was worth more than 50 gold pieces. He'd rather have that person work for him than for whoever would eventually come to kill him. Han smiled for the first time subtly with one corner of her mouth. She said she agreed, but if he cheated her, she would leave and take the crystal. Dohan replied that a pay stub doesn't lie. Numbers don't lie. Era untied her hands. Han rubbed her wrist. She looked at Era. Era looked at her with undisguised distress. Han winked at her. Era clenched her jaw and left. Han turned to Dohan and asked where her room was. Dohan pointed to the barracks. Han grimaced. She said she was used to rooftops, not barracks. Dohan replied that she'd get used to it. She left. Dohan sat down at the table and jotted something down in his notebook. Han, half-breed, head of intelligence, probationary period monitor. In the morning, he briefed the council. So Ren listened and said it was madness, letting a thief into the fortress. Era listened and said the same thing, only more bluntly. Yuna listened and said nothing. Foreman Cho listened and asked one thing. He asked if Dohan had seen her eyes when he offered her the job. Dohan replied that he had. The sergeant nodded. He said that the fox had the eyes of a starving child, not a thief. Dohan nodded. That was exactly why he had offered her the job. Han worked through her first week, then the second, then the third. She would disappear from the city for 2 or 3 days. She would return. She would come to Dohan. She would report in a quiet, even voice without emotion. Facts. Only facts. The Seven Hammers Guild is gathering mercenaries in the city of Gong. 300 swordsmen. 300 so far. A man named Yuk Chang is in command. A mercenary captain, my dear. Yuk Chang has a reputation as a man who takes cities in 2 weeks. The Seven Hammers are buying up grain in the area. Why buy up grain before winter? So that the city they declare a blockade on cannot buy food. Dohan listened. He took notes. He thought 300 mercenaries is not 1,000. But for a city without walls, that's enough. The walls aren't ready yet. The mining yard is surrounded. The warehouses are surrounded. The residential quarters aren't. He needs time, and he needs a grain reserve. He called for Yuna, asked how much grain was in the warehouses. Yuna answered instantly, for 100 poods. For 1,500 people, that's 2 months. If we cut back on rations, then 3. Doan said 3 isn't enough. We need 6. He made a decision. First, sell some of the silver and buy grain now before the 7 hammers buy it all up. Second, speed up the construction of the walls. Transfer some of the miners to the construction site. Third, secretly sell 3 monocrystals through her channels for gold. Use the gold to buy weapons, swords, spears, shields, bows, arrows. Era will make a list. Han will deliver them. So, Ren asked if it wasn't too early to panic. Doan replied that panic is for when it's too late. And when there's still time, it's preparation. So Ren fell silent. She understood. A week later, Han brought the first shipment of weapons. 20 swords, 30 spears, 10 bows, 500 arrows, all used, all in working condition. Era inspected every blade, every shaft, every tip. She approved. 20 swords don't make an army. But with 30 spears and 10 bows behind a stone wall, that's already a defense. Era began training the volunteers, miners who wanted to defend the city. 40 men signed up. During the day, they worked in the mine or on the construction site. In the evening, Era taught them how to hold a spear, how to stand in formation, not to run when they were scared. She was patient. This surprised one. He had expected at night to look down on men with spears, but Era didn't. She saw in them what she saw in herself. People defending what was theirs. By the 10th month, the city was a different place. Walls had closed and around the vineyard and the warehouses. The gates were made of thick oak logs, a single watchtower, small. But from it the road was visible for 2 kilometers. The population had surpassed 2,000. There was enough grain in the warehouses to last for months. Weapons had been distributed. Volunteers had been trained. Han reported that there were already 500 mercenaries. Yuk Chang was awaiting orders. The 7 hammers were biting for the right moment. They're waiting for the depths of winter, when the roads freeze over, and reinforcements can't get through. Doan sat in his office that evening, a notebook open, a pen in his hand. So Ren sat nearby, sketching a new machine. Behind the wall, Era was sharpening a sword. Yuna was balancing the books. Han disappeared 2 days ago. She'll be back tomorrow or the day after. Foreman Cho was sleeping at home. He had started coming to the council meetings less often. His health was failing. 30 years in the mine take their toll. Doan wrote in his notebook, the 10th month preparations for defense. Population 2,300. The walls are 60% complete. For months' worth of grain. 40 armed fighters, 10 guards. He closed the notebook. 50 warriors against 500 mercenaries. The math was bad, but math isn't everything. There were also the walls and mines, and the notebook containing the names of 2,300 people. Every name was a reason not to give up. Doan took a pickaxe and went down into the mine. He needed to strike the rock. The multiplier was waiting. Winter came early. Snow fell on Shinm at the beginning of the 11th month. Thick, heavy. The roads were buried in 3 days. Doan stood on the watchtower and looked out at the white fields surrounding the city. Silence. Beautiful and terrifying because 500 men with swords would soon be marching across that field. Han returned from reconnaissance with news. Yuk Chang had set out from Jiang. Not 500. 800. The mercenaries had been joined by soldiers from Taminer lords, who were in debt to the 7 hammers, plus a supply train, siege ladders, battering rams, and 3 monocatapults. Doan listened. 800 monocatapults. He closed his eyes for a second, opened them. Asked Ham how many days until they arrived. Ham replied, 5. Maybe 6 if the snowfall intensified. Doan nodded. 6 days. He convened a council, a military council, the first in Shin's history. Seated at the table were he, Era, So Ren, Han, Yuna, and Foreman Cho, who had come to spite his cough. Doan spread out a map, the city, the walls, the gates, the tower, the mine, the roads. He outlined the situation. 800 fighters, siege engines, monocatapults. They have 50 armed men and walls that are 70% complete. The northern section is unprotected. There is only a wooden palisade there. Era said the northern palisade wouldn't withstand a battering ram. Doan knew that. So Ren asked what she could do. Doan replied, mines, non-explosive ones, traps, pits with stakes at the approaches to the walls, fortified positions for archers, catapults made of sharpened logs. Anything that will slow down the attackers. Soda nodded. She had already been thinking it through. Ham asked what she should do. Dohan replied. Communication. He handed her a list, 8 names. Local lords who bought ore and silver from Kirki, and Tetrada to whom Don Juan sold at a fair price. No markup, no deception. 8 lords who owed him a favor. Not money, a favor. Dohan pulled a stack of papers from the table. Receipts, 8 receipts. Each confirmed that Lord So and O had received goods on credit from the Kirka and Tetra Guild with payment deferred for a year. The total debt was for 100 gold pieces. Han asked what the receipts had to do with it. Dohan explained 2 of the lords who had sent soldiers to Yuccan each owed him 70 gold pieces. Under the terms of the receipt, he could demand immediate repayment if the debtor violated the terms of the agreement. A military campaign against a creditor constituted such a violation. If he presented the receipt through the imperial court, these 2 lords would lose their lands. And without land, they are not lords. They are nobodies. Ham understood. She must deliver the promissory notes to these lords personally before the attack, so they can read them. They thought it over and withdrew their soldiers. Dohan said this would remove at least 200 swords out of 800, maybe more. Han nodded. She took the receipts and disappeared that very hour into the snowstorm. 3 days later, she returned frozen, hungry, with her feet scraped raw and bleeding. She collapsed on the office threshold and said that both lords had read them. Both had turned pale. Both recalled their soldiers minus 230 swords. Yuccan had 570 left. But that wasn't all. On the way, Han stopped by the remaining 6 lords, not with receipts, with a proposal. The pickaxe and the notebook would write off the debt in exchange for grain and fodder hay. 5 of the 6 agreed. 2 carts of grain are already on their way. Dohan listened. Then he quietly said that Han Mei would receive double her bonus for this month. Han replied that she'd prefer hot water and honey. Dohan stood up and brought it to her personally. Hot water with honey in a clay mug. Han took the mug with both hands. She drank in small sips. The tails emerged from under her cloak and wrapped around her legs. She didn't hide them. For the first time in front of someone, she didn't hide them. One noticed. He said nothing. 570 mercenaries. That's still a lot. Era said that when defending walls, a 3:1 ratio is considered acceptable. 50 on the walls hold off 150, but 570 is 11-1 unacceptable. Dohan replied that he didn't plan to defend. Everyone looked at him. He explained the walls. So ran the machines hand my information logistics, the sergeant people, and him Dohan the mine. He said he needed 1 day. 1 day in the mine, 1. No questions asked. Tomorrow he would go down. The day after tomorrow he would come up and he would have an answer. So Ren asked, what answer? Dohan replied that he didn't know yet. But the rock would tell him. It always does. In the morning, Dohan went down into the mine alone, deeper. Past the working levels, past the monocrystals to the secret cave. He broke through the stonework at the entrance. He went inside. The crystals on the walls glowed. An anvil stood in the center. The hammer lay in its place. A crack in the floor breathed heat. Dohan didn't touch the hammer. He didn't touch the anvil. He walked around the cave in a circle. He examined the walls. He tapped. He listened. He searched. He wasn't looking for ore. He was looking for structure. How sound travels through the rock. How the stone resonates. He was a mining engineer. He knew that rock isn't a monolith. It's layers. Each layer vibrates in its own way. Sound travels through some layers and fades in others. If you find the right layer and strike the right spot, the sound will travel far, very far. He tapped the walls for hours. He struck different spots with his pickaxe. He listened. The voice in his head was silent. Lucky Strike didn't activate because he wasn't mining ore. He was listening to the stone. And the stone answered. On the northern wall of the cave, at the point where 3 different strata converged, quartzite, granite, marble, 3 rocks with different densities, 3 speeds of sound. And at their junction, a narrow crack, a natural wave guide. Sound entering this crack was amplified, reflected, multiplied like a megaphone only made of stone. Dohan struck this spot for an hour methodically, calmly, blow after blow. The Lucky Strike activated on the 47th blow. When the pickaxe struck the monocrystal inside the gap, the stone split. The crack widened. Sound poured into it and returned tenfold. The echo struck the cave walls so hard that the crystals rang out. Dohan set down the pickaxe. He stood before the crack. He said one word in a normal voice quietly. He just said it, and his voice went into the crevice and came back loudly. So loud that his ears rang. A resonator, a natural sound amplification chamber. He spent another 3 hours widening the channel. He chiseled it upward following the cracks in the rock. The channel led to the surface. The sound traveled upward and escaped through dozens of tiny cracks in the rock, on which the city stood. He climbed up. He stepped outside the wall. He walked 300 meters from the city. He turned around and heard silence, then a faint hum, then nothing. He returned. He climbed back down. He widened the channel. He climbed up. He went out 500 meters from the city. He spoke aloud in his normal voice, standing on the rock above the channel's exit. His voice rang out over the snowfield like a bell, clear, steady, every word distinct. At a distance of 500 meters, maybe further, maybe a kilometer. He didn't check any farther. There was no need. Yukin's army would stop at the walls, 500 meters at most, and every mercenary would hear his voice as if he were standing right next to them. A whisper in their ear. Dohan went back down into the cave. He blocked the entrance. He went back up. He dusted himself off. He went to the office. He sat down at the desk. He opened his notebook. He wrote it down. Resonator found. Range of 500 meters. Voice amplification through a natural wave guide in the rock. Tomorrow. Yukin's army will be at the walls. He is ready. The army arrived at dawn. Dohan stood on the tower and watched a snowy field, a gray sky, and a black line on the horizon. They marched in a column stretched out over half a kilometer. Cavalry in front. Infantry behind them. Supply wagons behind the infantry. Carts, siege ladders, battering rams, and 3 monocatapults. Bulky machines on wheels. The crystals in their muzzles glowed red. Dohan counted 500, maybe 550. Ham was right. Era stood beside him, a sword at her belt, a shield on her back. Her braid was plaited and tucked under her helmet. Her face was calm. She had seen armies before. The young clan had served the emperor for 1,000 years, but she had never seen an army marching toward her. Her 3 soldiers stood on the wall. 20 archers, 30 spearmen from the volunteers. Everyone was in position. Everyone was silent. So, Ren was down below by the monodrive, by the winch, by the spare mechanisms. Her hands were covered in oil. She was checking everything 3 times. Yuna sat in the office. Books lay before her. She was recording the supplies. Food, water, medicine, bandages, arrows. She wasn't crying. She was counting. It was better than crying. Ham was on the wall, invisible in a white cloak on white snow. She watched, counted the banners, identified the units. Foreman Cho stood at the mine entrance. He couldn't climb the wall. His knees wouldn't hold him, but he stood and watched. The army had stopped for 100 meters from the walls. Yak Chong rode forward on a black horse in a black cloak, tall, broad-shouldered, his face covered by a half-mask. Another rider rode beside him, older in an expensive fur coat without armor. Ham whispered to Dohan, Master Ryuganu, head of the 7 Hammers Guild in person. Dohan looked at the old man in the fur coat. So it was him. The man who had spent 40 years building a monopoly. Who controlled 80% of the market. Who had decided that a small town with a small guild was a threat. Rai Gansu stopped his horse, his voice carried across the field, loud, commanding. The voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. He demanded that the gates be opened. He said that the city of Shinmai was located in a territory declared a strategic zone by Decree 97 of the Imperial Council. He said that the Pickaxe and Notebook was extracting resources without a 7 Hammers license. He said that all the town's residents were guaranteed safety if they laid down their weapons. And Sir entered the mine. Dohan listened. Then he turned to Era. He quietly asked what she thought. Era replied that Decree 97 was a forgery. There is no such decree. A registered guild with a city charter does not require a 7 Hammers license. And the safety guaranteed by mercenaries is worth less than the snow underfoot. Dohan nodded. He turned to Han. He asked if the resonator was ready. Han replied that the passage was open. The cliff above the city was clear. Dohan climbed down from the wall. He walked through the city. People stood along the streets in silence. Women, children, old people. Moonhee held her son close. Namsu stood with a pickaxe in his hands. Bai sat on a bench coughing, the blacksmith. Park Cho held a hammer. Everyone watched Dohan. He walked calmly through the city toward the mine entrance. He descended to the lowest level into the cave to the resonator. He stood before the crack in the rock. He closed his eyes. He inhaled, he exhaled, and he spoke. His voice went into the stone. The stone took it in, amplified it, sent it out through hundreds of cracks in the rock and over the snowy field before Yukin's army. A voice rang out, soft, calm, but audible to everyone, as if someone were standing right next to them, speaking directly into their ear. Dohan said his name was Park Dohan, that he was a garbage collector from Taebaek, that he had written down the name of everyone living in the city in his notebook. 2,412 names that if they entered, he would have to cross them out. And he doesn't like crossing names out. His handwriting is terrible. Silence. Snow fell on the field. The mercenaries stood and listened. The voice came from everywhere. From the ground, from the air, from the stone. As if the mountain itself were speaking. Yuk Chang looked back at his men. They stood motionless, spears raised. But no one moved until one continued. He said he knew why they had come. For the ore, for silver, for crystals, for money. He said he understood. They were mercenaries. They worked for Bai. That was their trade. He respected a trade. Any trade. Then he fell silent for 3 seconds and said something else. He said that miners lived in this town. They'd worked for Bai. It was a trade, too. The difference is that a miner who loses his job will starve to death. But a mercenary who doesn't take one contract will find another. He asked, is one contract worth 2,000 people losing their homes? Silence. Long cold. Ryugansu turned to Yukon and said, that's something. Dohan didn't hear what, but he saw. Yuk Chang shook his head. Ryugansu repeated it louder. Yuk Chang shook his head again. Dohan continued. He said that the pickaxe and the notebook had IOS from 6 neighboring lords. The total amount was 260 gold pieces. Every lord is out of the game. He said the city charter was signed by the imperial auditor. Confiscation is possible only through the imperial court. The process will take 2 years. During that time, Hammer and Tetrad will file a counterclaim for armed assault on the city. The penalty for this under imperial law is 1,000 gold pieces plus compensation, plus revocation of the guild license. He said this calmly as if reading a statement of account. Numbers, facts, without emotion. Ryugansu sat on his horse and listened. His face changed. First anger, then calculation, then something resembling respect. He was a predator, but a smart one. And he heard no bluff in Dohan's voice. He heard numbers, real ones, verifiable ones. Every word backed by paper. Every piece of paper backed by a seal. Dohan fell silent. Silence. Snow. Wind. The first mercenary lowered his spear silently. He just lowered it. The second. The third. The 10th. Yuk Chang looked at his men. They didn't run. They didn't mutiny. They stood and lowered their weapons one by one because the voice from the mountain had told them the truth. Not a threat, not a curse, the truth that they were mercenaries. Not executioners, that the contract wasn't worth it. That they could leave. Yuk Chang turned to Ryugansu. He took off his half-mask, a young face, 30 maybe. A scar on his chin, tired eyes. He said one thing. The contract is terminated. Ryugansu sat motionless on his horse. A minute, 2, 3. Snow fell on his fur coat, on his shoulders, on his gray hair. Then he dismounted slowly, like an old man. He took the family hammer from his belt, heavy, golden, with the seal of the 7 hammers on the butt. He walked toward the shin gates, alone, without guards. Yuk Chang watched him go and didn't move. Ryugansu walked toward the gate. He stopped. Dohan was already up there. He had climbed out of the shaft and onto the wall. He stood there looking down at the old man with the hammer. Ryugansu raised his head. Their eyes met. The old predator and the young miner. Ryugansu placed the hammer on the snow by the gate. Slowly, carefully. As one places something precious, he straightened up and spoke. He said he had built the 7 hammers for 40 years, that he controlled the market, that he fed thousands of families, that he did it as best he could, ruthlessly, without mercy. Because that's how he was taught. Because that's how the world works. The strong take, the weak give. He said he had come here to take the mine. But he heard a voice from the mountain. And the voice told him something he had forgotten 40 years ago. That a miner isn't a resource. A miner is a name in a notebook. He said he was asking for a job for himself, for his people. For those who came with him, that now stand in the field without a contract and without a home. Dohan looked at him from the wall for a long time. Then he nodded. The gate opened. Ryugansu entered. Dohan climbed down from the wall. He approached the old man. He picked up the hammer from the ground. He held it out to him. Ryugansu took it. His hands were shaking. Dohan said the hammer would still come in handy. You always need a good hammer in a mine. Ryugansu looked at him. He nodded. Outside the gate, Yukon's army knelt in the snow, not defeated. Waiting, Dohan stepped outside the gate with a notebook, with a pen. He sat down at the table Hojin had brought out into the snow and asked the first man in line, "What's your name, and what can you do with your hands?" A mercenary, 30 years old, mustache. Confused. He said he could wield a spear and do a little carpentry. His father was a carpenter. Dohan wrote it down. Name, age, skills. Next. Dohan kept writing until evening, so Ren brought him tea. He didn't notice. Yuna brought out a new notebook when the old one ran out. Air stood by the gate and kept order in the line. Hand sat on the wall and nibbled on a honey gingerbread cookie. Foreman Cho looked out the office window and cried quietly, the way old miners know how to cry. Soundlessly. Snow was falling. The line stretched to the horizon. and the garbage miner from Taebaek sat at a table in the snow and wrote down names. Spring came to Shin Malong with mud and hope. The snow was melting, the roads thawed, but the city did not stand still, it grew. After the surrender of Yuk Chan's army, Shin's population grew from 2,400 to 7,000 in a single month. The mercenaries Dohan had written down in his notebook turned out to be more than just swordsmen. Among them were carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmiths, cooks. Two knew how to sew sails. One knew how to make paper from wood pulp. Dohan found work for everyone. The swordsmen joined the guard under Era's command. The carpenters built houses. The masons finished the wall. The blacksmiths took their places at the forges alongside Parkchul. The cooks opened to dining halls. The man with the paper was given a workshop and assistants. 3 weeks later, Shin had its own paper. Rough gray with fibers, but paper. Dohan held the first sheet in his hands and looked at it for a long time. Paper is more valuable than silver. That's what Foreman Cho used to say. Not anymore. Now paper is a resource. Spreadsheets, textbooks, blueprints, documents. He ordered the first batch of notebooks, 200 of them, for the school. He had conceived the school back in the winter. Now there was time. There was a place. There were children. 240 children aged 6 to 14. Miners' children, soldiers, children, widows. Children. Not a single one of them could read. Not a single one could count past 20. Dohan found a former temple scribe among the mercenaries, an old man named Moongwan. 6 to 2 years old, quiet, stooped, his hands trembled, but his handwriting was perfect. Tuan appointed him as the teacher. The school occupied a large stone house near the market square. So Ren designed the desks. Yuna set aside an office for accounting classes. A sign hung on the office door. Choi Yuna, accounting instructor. Dohan nailed it up himself. Yuna saw the sign and stood in front of it for so long that Ham came to check if something was wrong. Yuna stood there tracing her name on the wood with her fingers slowly, like a blind person reading. Ham looked at her. Then she left without a word. That evening she went to Dohan and said he was a dangerous man. Dohan asked why. Ham replied that he made people start believing in themselves. And that was the most dangerous thing you could do to a person, because then it was impossible to take that belief away. Tuan replied that he had no intention of taking it away. Ham looked at him, green eyes, sharp. But there was something new, something soft. She said nothing. She left. She left a piece of honey gingerbread on his desk. The Yugansu was working. This surprised everyone. Master Seven Hammers, a man who had sat at a desk for 40 years and commanded thousands. Now he walked around the Mynard in a leather apron counting ore. Dohan had appointed him head of logistics. Yugansu knew the trade routes. He knew every merchant from the southern coast to the northern passes. He knew the prices of every metal in every city of the empire. This was knowledge that couldn't be bought with money. Only through 40 years of life in the business, Dohan made full use of it. In a month, Ryugansu restructured the Pickaxe and Notebooks trading network. Previously, or was sold through a single middleman in the county seat. Now, shipments went directly to 6 cities via 3 routes. The price per ton had risen by 30%. Net profit had doubled. Dohan looked at the numbers and nodded. The old predator knew his business. One evening, the two of them were sitting alone in the office. Ryugansu was drinking tea. Dohan was writing in his notebook. Ryugansu asked why Dohan had taken him on for real, not just for show, not to humiliate him. Why had he given him a real job with real responsibility? Dohan answered without looking up from his notebook. He said that Ryugansu had fed thousands of families for 40 years with bad methods, cruel ones. But he had fed them. So he knew how, so he was needed. Methods could be changed. Skill could not. Ryugansu was silent. Then he said quietly that in 40 years, no one had ever told him he knew how to feed people. They had told him he knew how to make money. It wasn't the same thing. Dohan nodded. Not the same thing. Ryugansu finished his tea and left. From that evening on, he worked twice as hard. The 6th month of the 2nd year, Amber Rain arrived with the first spring caravan. Red-haired, freckled, loud, 37 wagons, salt, cloth, tools, medicines, spices. She was the captain of a trade caravan and a former imperial quartermaster. Dismissed from the army for exposing her own colonel's embezzlement, Dohan met her at the gates. She jumped down from the wagon. She surveyed the city, the walls, the mine, the winch, the warehouses, people. Then she turned to Dohan and said this was the most organized city she'd seen in 10 years of caravan travel. Dohan replied that organization was the only thing they had. Amber laughed loudly, loud enough for the whole courtyard to hear. She said that organization was the only thing they needed. Everything else could be bought. They spent the evening at the table. Amber laid out maps of trade routes. Doan laid out his books. They compared figures, argued, calculated. Amber knew logistics as well as Ren knew machinery. Every route, every pass, every outpost, how much the toll cost, how much they charge for protection, where you can cut corners, where you can't. Doan listened and took notes. By midnight, they had a plan. A permanent trade route from Shin through to hub cities to the southern port. For caravans a month, or down, goods up, 300% profit. Amber looked at him across the table, maps and notebooks between them. The candle was burning down. She said what was left, didn't ask for permission, stated it as a fact. Doan nodded. He wrote it down in his notebook. Amber Rain, caravan captain, head of logistics, permanent contract. Amber glanced at the notebook, read her line, smiled, so that for the first time her name had been written in a book, not as a defendant. Doan replied that this was the first and last book that mattered, the book of people. Amber placed her hand on top of his briefly, lightly. Then she took it away and said she needed a room with a south-facing window. She was used to the sun. Doan gave her a room with a south-facing window. So, Ren left a mug of tea on the windowsill. No one had asked, so Ren simply knew that a newcomer to the city would be tired from the journey. It was unobtrusive, like everything Ren did. Unobtrusive and necessary. By the end of spring, Shin had become a different place. 12,000 residents, a man-powered mine elevator. So Ren had built it over 3 months. The platform carried 20 people at a time, or a ton of ore. The school for 100 children operated every day. The market opened at dawn. The forges smoked from morning till night. For if Amber's caravans left and returned on schedule, the wall closed in around the entire city. A full perimeter, gates to the east and west, 3 watchtowers. Era's garrison had grown to 200 men. 40 of them were Yuk Chan's former mercenaries. Yuk Chan stayed too. Era appointed him her deputy. He didn't object. He saw how she commanded, and he acknowledged that she was better silently as soldiers acknowledge. Not with words, with deeds. He simply stood behind her and didn't leave. Doan recorded everything. Every evening, notebook after notebook. Names, numbers, plans, blueprints. He stayed in the office late. Siren sat next to him and drew. They didn't talk. They just worked side by side in silence. He brought her tea every evening. She didn't say thank you. She just drank it. 180 days in a row. She didn't count. He didn't count. But they both knew. The priestess arrived in the summer. Sunjian, 25 years old, long black hair, a white robe, bare feet on the dusty road. She walked alone without guards, without luggage. Only a white wooden staff and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The guards at the gate stopped her. Era came in person. She looked at the priestess. The priestess looked at Era. 20 seconds of silence. Then Jian said she had been sent by the Temple of Roots to study the strange mana emanating from the Shin mine mines. Era led her to Doan. He was sitting in his office, a notebook, numbers as always. Jian entered and stopped at the threshold. She wasn't looking at Doan. She was looking at the pickaxe. The curved pickaxe stood against the wall in the corner of the office, runes on the blade, warm to the touch. June stared at it without blinking. Her fingers clenched the staff so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Doan noticed this. He asked what she saw. June didn't answer right away. She said she saw a light, an ancient light. A light 1,000 years old. A light that shouldn't be in a tool. It should be in a temple, or in a mountain, or in the heart of the world, but not in a pickaxe. Doan was silent. June turned to him. She asked where he'd gotten the pickaxe. Doan replied that he had found it at the bottom of the rift. It was lying next to him when he woke up. Jian sat down on a chair slowly, as if her legs had given out. She said that according to temple lore, 1,000 years ago, the godsmith Karhan had tried to dig down to the root heart, the source of all the continent's mana. He didn't make it. He died in the mine shaft. His tools remained in the ground. The temple had searched for them for 500 years. They hadn't found them. She said that this pickaxe was Karhan's tool. Doan looked at the pickaxe, then at the priestess. He said that the pickaxe works. It amplifies his blow, doubles the power and the chance of a find. A voice in his head tells him this with every strike. Jian nodded. She said it wasn't a system, not magic. It's a testament. God put the last thing he had into the pickaxe. His will, his desire to reach the end. The pickaxe seeks the one who will reach the end for him. Doan asked how she chose him. Jian replied that it was based on a simple criterion. The first mortal who picked it up and wasn't afraid to strike the wall. Doan remembered the darkness, the smell of sulfur, the pickaxe in his hand. Striking the wall just to test his hand, he didn't think. He wasn't afraid. He just struck. Because a miner with a pickaxe strikes rock. It's a reflex. He smiled. So he was chosen for his reflexes. Jian said it was for his reflexes and for death. Karhan was looking for a miner who would die saving others. Who would pick up the tool not for himself, but because the tool needed to be raised. Dohan remembered the trainees, a rock falling from above, his own hands pushing the guys out of the way. His last thought was of the support calculation he hadn't finished. He didn't save them for the reward. He simply couldn't help but save them. Just as he couldn't help but strike the wall with a pickaxe, a reflex, habit nature. Jian said she would stay in Shinmai, that the temple had entrusted her with watching over the mana, but she would watch over the pickaxe and the man who held it. Dohan gave her a room. Jian settled him quietly like a shadow. She walked barefoot through the city. She was silent. She observed. People glanced at her. A priestess of the Temple of Roots was no ordinary guest. The temple held power influence. A priestess's word could close a mine or open it. Bless the city or curse it. But June neither blessed nor cursed. She simply was. She sat at the mine entrance and listened to the rock. She walked through the tunnels and touched the walls. She looked at the crystals with an expression that Dohan could not read. Once he asked what she loved. Not the temple, not the gods, her personally. What she loved. June froze. She stood in the middle of the Minyard, barefoot on the warm stone. The wind ruffled her hair. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and said nothing because she had no answer. She had been raised as a vessel, as an instrument of the temple. She had duties, rituals, prayers, functions, but no desires. No one had ever asked what she loved because it didn't matter. She mattered only as a priestess, not as a person. Until one saw that she couldn't answer, he didn't rush her. He nodded and left. Left her standing there to think for the first time in her life to think about herself. The summer was hot. The mine yielded ore steadily. Silver, iron, monocrystals. Dohan went down every 3 days. He struck with the pickaxe. He held the multiplier. His hands were covered in calluses that never went away. He was the head of the city. The head of the guild, a commander, a strategist, an accountant, and a miner. Above all, a miner. The pickaxe demanded calluses, and he gave them. The second year was nearing its midpoint. Dohan thought more and more often about the cave, about the anvil, about the hammer, about the crack in the floor from which heat emanated, about the root heart. Jiun said that Karan hadn't made it. He died in the mine. Dohan looked at the pickaxe and thought, God didn't make it. God, with the power no mortal can possess, didn't make it. But he, a trash miner, he will make it. But not now. Now the city, now the people, now 12,000 names in the notebook. First them, then the abyss. The lean winter isn't over. Metal prices are still high. The northern garrisons are still without armor. Peasants are still paying with iron instead of coins. One city won't fix the empire, but one city can show how. Dohan opened his notebook and began writing a plan. Not for a month, for a year. Mine expansion, new horizons, new working faces, new allied guilds. Training miners from other cities in support and ventilation methods, exporting technologies. Pumps, winches, monodrives. Not for free, for a share, for an alliance, for a commitment to keep records and buy payrolls. He wrote until dawn. So Ren slept at the next table, her face buried in a blueprint. He covered her with his jacket and continued writing. The third year began with a celebration. The first anniversary of the victory over the Seven Hammers, the winter festival of Shin. Dohan had been preparing for it for a week. He asked Amber to bring spices from the southern port. Pepper, salt, garlic, green onions, beef bones, lots of bones. Amber asked why he needed half a ton of beef bones. Dohan replied that he was making soup. Amber raised her eyebrows. Half a ton of bones for soup. Dohan replied that the soup was for 30,000 people. Amber didn't argue. She brought the bones and the spices and 3 barrels of rice noodles and 2 sacks of red pepper. Dohan placed a huge cauldron in the center of the market square, an iron one. Blacksmith Parcho had forged it especially a meter in diameter. The walls were 2 fingers thick. He lit the fire and began to cook. Salongtong. Real Korean salongtong, bone broth. 12 hours of cooking. Meat, noodles, green onions, salt, pepper. Dohan stood by the cauldron and stirred by himself. Personally. So, Ren came to help. He wouldn't let her. Eric came to help. He wouldn't let her. Ham came to steal a piece of meat. He caught her by the hand and didn't let her. She pouted. He smiled. By noon, the smell had spread throughout the city. People flocked to the cauldron. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. A line stretched from the square to the eastern gate. Dohan stood by the cauldron with a ladle and served to everyone personally with his own hands. He wouldn't let his assistants near him. It was his job, his soup, his people. He served and asked, "What's your name? Which mine are you from?" How are your children? How's your back? How are your eyes? People answered. They smiled. Some cried. Namsa received his bowl and sat down on the ground right by the cauldron. He ate and cried. Hojin received his and ate standing up quickly. Then he got in line at the end for seconds. Moon he received two bowls, one for herself and one for her son. The boy held the bowl with both hands and blew on the broth. Bai received his bowl. He coughed. He tasted it. He looked at Dohan. He said, well, and added a second word, delicious, 2 words for the entire year. A record. Yu Gansu approached silently. He received a bowl. He tasted it. He stood there for a moment. Then he quietly said that in 40 years, no one had ever made him soup. Dohan replied that in 40 years, he hadn't asked for any. Ryu Gansu nodded and left with his bowl. Dohan had been serving for 6 hours. 6 hours on his feet by the pot with a ladle. His back his hands burned. He didn't stop. By sunset, the line had thinned out. An old woman was the last to approach, small, hunchbacked in an old headscarf. She had been standing at the end of the line the whole time, 6 hours in silence. Dohan poured her a bowl full to the brim. She took it. Her hands were shaking. Dohan asked her name. The old woman looked up at him, cloudy eyes, old. She said no one had asked her name in 40 years. Dohan froze, ladle in hand, steam rising from the cauldron, 30,000 people behind him. And this old woman who hadn't cared about her name for 40 years. He took a notebook out of his pocket, that very one, the one with the names. He opened a blank page. He asked again, what is your name? The old woman said, Palmson. Dohan wrote it down, Palmson. Next to the bowl, next to the date, next to the holiday. So Ren was standing 3 steps away. She saw everything. She heard everything. She turned away quickly because she didn't want anyone to see. But saw, and Han saw, and Yuna saw, and June saw. Everyone saw, and everyone turned away. Each for her own reason, each from her own pain. The next day, a board hung on the shin gate, a large one made of wood. It read, they live in the city. And below in a column, names, all 30,000 in small handwriting. Yuna wrote all night. Dohan stood beside her and dictated every name from every notebook. 30,000. By dawn. The board was full. Yuna took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. They were red. She asked why she was doing this. Dohan replied that a name on the board meant you were someone, that you lived here, that you had been counted, that they knew about you. Yuna put her glasses back on. She looked at the board. She found her name. 3rd line from the bottom, Chi, registration supervisor. She pressed her palm against the board. Then she took it away and went to sleep. For the first time in a year without tears, it had become a tradition. Every new resident of Shin would first go to the board and find their name or wait until it was written down. Children would run to the board and point their fingers. Here's Dad. Here's Mom. Here I am. The old people came in the morning and stood in silence. They just stood there and looked at their names as if checking that they were there, that they existed, that someone had written them down. Spring of the 3rd year, Dohan descended into the primordial rift, that very stone pipe at the bottom of which he had woken up 2 years ago. He walked alone through the passage that led from the mine to the rift, 300 meters. The same walls, the same iron ore, the same warm rock with shimmering dots. Only now he knew what they were. Monocrystal sleeping unrevealed deposits that stretched for kilometers beneath the city. Enough for 100 years of mining. He reached the shaft, climbed down to the bottom, stood in the very spot where he had lain 2 years ago, looked up. A greenish light seeped from the walls, far above, a faint patch of daylight. He turned and walked down. Not up, down. Because the shaft didn't end at the bottom. It continued. A crack in the floor, narrow, but passable. Khan had been mining here 1,000 years ago. His blows had left steps in the walls of the crack rough, worn away by time, but steps nonetheless. Dom began to descend, pickaxe on his back, a lantern in his hand. But he didn't need the lantern. With every meter down, the walls glowed brighter. Crystals, dozens, hundreds, blue, green, red, gold, colors he had never seen before. Rocks he didn't recognize. The air was hot, dry. It smelled of metal and something sweet, like honey warmed by the sun. He descended for an hour, counting the steps. 347, about 200 meters deep, deeper than any mine in his former world. Deeper than any mine in Kalera. The walls narrowed. The crevice became so narrow that his shoulders brushed the rock on both sides. The heat intensified. Sweat ran down his face, down his back. The pickaxe on his back pulsed, warm, alive. The runes on the blade glowed, a dim white light. They had never glowed before until one stopped. A wall ahead, a dead end, the end of the crack. Karan had reached the spot and could go no further. Here he died. Doan placed his palm on the wall, hot, almost scorching. Behind the wall, something was pulsing powerfully, rhythmically, like a heartbeat, the root heart, the source of all mana. Behind this wall, a few meters away, maybe just one, Doan took the pickaxe off his back. The runes burned brightly white. A voice sounded in his head, not like usual, not a mechanical female voice reciting numbers. A different one, male, deep, old. The voice said one word, strike. Doan swung and struck. The first blow, the stone cracked. The voice in his head, luck. Strike activated, multiplier at maximum, all stats doubled. Second strike, the crack widened. Third, fourth, fifth, he struck without stopping. The multiplier didn't reset. It grew, doubling upon doubling. The strength in his arms grew with every blow. The pickaxe sank deeper and deeper into the rock. The stone that had defied the gods yielded to him, not because he was stronger, because he knew where to strike. 6 years of mining, 6 years of reading the strata. He saw the rock structure. He saw the weak spots, the lines of stress, micro cracks. Karan struck with force. Doan struck with precision. The 10th blow, the 20th, the 30th. The wall was crumbling. The pickaxe cut through the stone like a knife through butter. The runes on the handle burned so brightly it hurt to look. A man's voice, an old man's. It spoke with every blow. Not words, a rhythm. Like a hammer on an anvil, like a heartbeat. The 40th blow. The wall vanished. Behind it, light, golden, warm, blinding. Doan closed his eyes. He'd embraced him from all sides. Not scorching, warm like hands, like an embrace. He opened his eyes. The root heart, a cave, huge. The ceiling was lost in golden light. Walls of pure crystal. The floor was made of pure crystal. In the center of the cave stood a pillar of light, golden, as thick as 3 human figures. It stretched down into infinity, then up into infinity. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, the heartbeat of the world. Mana, pure mana. So much mana that the air rang with it. Doan stood in the doorway and watched. He felt no fear. He felt no elation. He felt what a miner feels when, after many months of work, he finally sees the vein. Quiet satisfaction. The job is done. He had made it. At the base of the pillar of light lay a stone, flat, smooth. On the stone lay a plate, metal with runes, writing. Doan approached. He picked up the plate. The runes were the same as those on the pickaxe. He didn't know how to read them, but the pickaxe did. He pressed the plate against the pickaxe's blade. The runes lit up, and a voice in his head read. A man's, an old man's, Karen's voice. Forgive me for not making it in time. Finish it for me. One line, one last will. For 1,000 years, the plate had lain here, waiting for the one who would reach it. Doan held the plate in his hands, heavy, warm. He stood before the root heart and thought, finish it for me. What is there to finish? Khan wanted to reach the heart. Doan reached it. But why? Not to become a god, not to take power, to repair it. The withered winter. 3 years without new veins. Mana is running dry. The mines are emptying. People are dying because the root heart is damaged. The root war 1,000 years ago broke something inside. Mana flows but slowly like blood from a wounded body. Karkin wanted to reach it and fix it. He didn't make it. Doan looked at the pillar of light, at the cracks in the crystal floor, at the dark spots on the walls, traces of an ancient war damage. He saw them as clearly as he saw the cracks in the rock, as he saw the weak spots in the face wall. It was the same work. Only the scale was different. Not a mine, the world. He sat down on the cave floor. He took a scrap of paper and a stub of a pencil out of his pocket and began to count. Doan spent 3 days in the Ruart cave. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He counted. He examined. He tapped the crystals on the floor on walls. He measured the cracks with his palms. He memorized. His notebook filled up in the first 6 hours. He flipped over the com plate and began writing on the back in small, tightly numbers, diagrams. Arrows. The root heart was damaged in 7 places. 7 cracks in the crystalline base. Through them, mana leaked into the empty rock and dissipated like water from a leaky bucket. Each crack had its own length and depth. Each required its own approach. He knew how to seal cracks in rock. 6 years at the open pit mine had taught him. The principle was the same. Fill the void with a material that withstands pressure in a mine that's concrete or resin. Here, mana crystals, pure, perfectly shaped, inserted into the crack at the right angle. The crystal absorbs the mana pressure, transfers it to the wall holds. The crack is sealed. He came up to the surface on the 4th morning, dirty, exhausted, with red eyes and chapped lips. So, Ren was waiting at the mine entrance. She hadn't slept for 3 days. Era stood nearby, sword at her belt, a stony face. Hand sat on the office roof. Yuna stood in the doorway with a book pressed to her chest. June sat barefoot against the wall with her eyes closed. Amber stood a little way off with her arms crossed. Ryugansu stood by the gate. Everyone was waiting for 3 days. Doan looked at them at each one, at everyone. He said he had found the root heart, that it was damaged, and that he could repair it. So Ren asked how. Doan explained, 7 cracks, 7 crystal plugs. Each must be shaped precisely to fit the crack, each inserted at the correct angle, each secured with a pickaxe blow to the right spot. So listened. Then she said that shaping the crystal to fit was an engineering problem. Her engineering problem. She needed the crack measurements. Doan handed her the notebook, so Ren opened it. She read for 10 minutes. Then she looked up. There was something in her eyes that Doan had seen only once before, when she first started the winch. An engineer's thrill at an impossible task. She said she needed a week. Doan gave her a week, so Ren worked like a woman possessed. She went down into the cave with her tools, and spent days there taking precise measurements of every crack. Then she came back up and locked herself in the workshop. 7 crystals, 7 shapes, each one unique. She cut the crystals with the diamond chisel that Doan had found on the lower horizon. She carved, she polished, she checked, she reworked. Doan brought her food. He set it by the door. He knocked. He left as always, 243 days in a row. So, Ren didn't count, but she knew. On the 5th day, she came out. 7 crystals lay on a velvet cloth. Each one shone. Each one was perfect. Doan picked up the first one. He turned it over. He looked at So-Ren. He said she was a genius. So replied that she wasn't a genius. She was an engineer. The difference was that a genius couldn't explain how they did it, but she can in for 100 pages of blueprints. Doan smiled. He assembled a team. Not everyone, just the ones he needed. So, Ren would go with him. She would need to adjust the crystal installations. Jiun would go. She senses mana. She would tell them when the flow was restored. The rest would stay up top. And Era is in charge of the city. Yuna keeps the books. Han guards the perimeter. Amber oversees the caravans. Ryugansu manages trade. Era didn't want to let him go. She said his place was on the surface. That he was the head of the city. That without him, Shin would be orphaned. Doan replied that his place was where the pickaxe was. It always had been. He was a miner. And that was a miner's job, to go down and fix what was broken. Era was silent. Then she nodded briefly in a military fashion, and she turned away. Ham approached him before the descent. She held out a small package. Inside was a honey gingerbread cookie. She said he might crave something sweet down there. Doan took it, put it in his pocket. Han stood in front of him and watched, green eyes to tails. She hadn't hidden them in a long time. She told him to come back. Didn't ask, told him like a fact, like an entry in a ledger. Come back without fail. The penalty for non-compliance wasn't specified, but it was implied. Dawn nodded. Yuna approached last silently. She handed him a new notebook, a blank one. Doan took it. He asked why. Yuna replied that when he fixed the heart, he would need to write it down for the report. Doan looked at her small and round glasses, straight back, steady hands, a master. He nodded. Write it down for the report. Without fail, the 3 of them went down. Diwan Senjian 347 steps down to 100 meters underground. Into the root heart cave, golden light, a pillar of mana, the pulse of the world. So Ren saw the cave and froze at the threshold. She stood and looked. Then she said quietly that it was the most beautiful engineering structure she had ever seen in her life. Awan replied that it wasn't a structure, it was a heart. So Ren said that a heart was also an engineering structure, just a very good one. Jiun entered the cave barefoot. The floor crystals were warm. She closed her eyes. She listened. Mana flowed around her. Through her, she felt every crack, every rupture, every drop of mana flowing into the void. She opened her eyes. She pointed to the first crack. Here, Doan approached. He took out the first crystal, so Ren stood beside him. She checked the angle. She showed him how to insert it. Doan inserted the crystal into the crack. Perfect. The shape matched. Then he took the pickaxe. The runes glowed white, Khan's voice in his head. Quiet, approving. A strike. 1. Precise. The crystal entered the crack and froze. It flared up. Golden light ran through it. The crack closed. June sighed. She said the flow had been restored at the spot. 6 left. The second crack, the third, 4th. So Ren adjusted each crystal. Doan inserted them. He struck. The pickaxe rang out. The light grew with every crack that closed. The cave grew brighter, warmer, more alive. The 5th crack turned out to be deeper than the rest. The crystal didn't reach the bottom, so Ren looked and frowned. She said a different approach was needed. 2 crystals were needed, 1 at the base, the second on top. Doan looked at her. They had 7 crystals for 7 cracks. If they used 2 on one, there wouldn't be enough for the last one. So Ren said she knew. Dohan thought for a minute. Then he took a ham honey gingerbread out of his pocket, unwrapped it, ate half. He put the other half back. So, Ren asked what the gingerbread had to do with it. Dohan replied that he thinks better when he chews. So Ren snorted. Dohan looked at the pickaxe. Runes, a crystal in the head. The crystal that Karhand hated fused 1,000 years ago. He asked June if the pickaxe could replace the crystal in the last crack. June closed her eyes. She opened them. She said that the pickaxe contained more mana than all 7 crystals combined. It could seal not just 1 crack, but 10. But if he inserted the pickaxe into the crack, it would remain there forever. A part of the root heart, Dohan froze. The pickaxe, his pickaxe, Karen's tool, lucky strike, doubling everything that made him special. If he gave up the pickaxe, he would become an ordinary person, a miner without abilities, a craftsman without magic. He looked at the pickaxe, crooked, old, with runes, warm. He had held it for 2 years. It had brought him here. It had given him everything. Silver, mono crystals, the city, people, life. And now it asked for one thing. Let go. Finish it. Dohan closed his eyes, opened them, looked at So-Ren. She looked at him and understood. She knew what he would decide. She had known him for 243 days. She knew every sigh he made over his notebook, every cup of tea he drank by the workshop door. She knew. Dohan inserted 2 crystals into the 5th crack. One at the base, the 2nd on top, a blow sealed. The 6th, a crystal, a blow sealed. The 7th, the last one, the deepest, the oldest, a crack from the blow of the tree god 1,000 years ago. Dohan approached it. He knelt down. He placed the pickaxe in the crack. The pickaxe fit perfectly like a key in a lock. The runes burned. Karhan's voice, not words, a sound like a sigh of relief, like the exhalation of a man who can finally sleep. Dohan placed his palm on the pickaxe one last time. Warm, familiar. 2 years in his hand. Every day, every blow, every callus. He withdrew his hand, stood up, and struck the pickaxe's blade with his fist. Just his fist. Without the tool, with his bare hand. It hurt. His knuckles cracked, but the pickaxe went all the way into the crack and flared up. Golden light flooded the cave. The pillar of mana in the center hummed deeply, powerfully like an engine that had started after 1,000 years of inactivity. The crystals on the walls glowed all at once, every single one. The floor trembled. June fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her face. She said the mana was coming. All of it. In a full flood for the first time in 1,000 years. Serene grabbed Dohan's hand. She squeezed it tightly. The cave glowed. The world beneath their feet trembled and hummed. Mana flowed upward through the stone, through the rock, through the mine, through the city, into the earth, into the veins, into the crystals, into everything. Dohan stood in the center of the cave without a pickaxe in his hand. For the first time in 2 years, his hands were empty, his knuckles were bloody, and he was smiling. They climbed to the surface for hours later. Slowly, Dohan walked last. He counted the steps. 347 for the last time. Everyone was waiting for them at the top. Era at the mine exit, head on her sword, eyes on him. Yuno with a notebook. Ham on the roof with a gingerbread cookie. Amber at the gate. Ryugansu at the office, Namsu. Hojinbei. Moonhee with her son. Blacksmith Park Cho. Foreman Cho in a chair by the window. 30,000 people outside the walls. Dohan stepped into the light. Morning. The sun. One sun, not 2. He blinked. Looked again. 1. Serene looked 2. She saw it too. Jun looked up at the sky and laughed. For the first time, a quiet, clear laugh. She said the 2nd sun was a reflection of mana in the upper atmosphere. A distortion from the root heart. Now the heart is whole. The distortion has vanished. 1 sun, the real one. Dohan looked up at the sky. 1 sun, bright, warm, spring-like. He stood at the mine entrance, looking up at the sky. And he didn't need a pickaxe to feel that the world had changed. The air was different, lighter, cleaner, warmer. The lean winter was over. Right now. This morning. Forever. Era approached. She looked at his hands, broken knuckles, blood. She took a handkerchief from her belt and bandaged them silently, tightly like a soldier. Then she looked him in the eyes and nodded. Yuna ran up. She held out a notebook and a pen. He told her he needed a minute. Yuna said the report wouldn't wait. Dome laughed. Ham jumped down from the roof. She walked over. She looked at his empty hands. She asked where the pickaxe was. Don replied that the pickaxe was at home. Han didn't understand. Dohan explained. The pickaxe remained in the heart. It had sealed the last crack. It was part of the world now. Ham was silent. Then she quietly asked if that meant he was no longer special. No more splitting. No more voice in his head. No more magic. Dohan looked at her. Then at So-ren. Then at Oh, at Yuna, at June, at Amber, at Ryuganu, at Foreman Cho in the window, at Namsu, Hojin and Bae, at the city around them, at the walls, at the winch with the sign, at the board with the names by the gate. He replied that he had never been special. He was a miner who knew how to read the strata and count and set supports and cook soup. The pickaxe helped, but everything he built, he didn't build with the pickaxe. He built it with a notebook and his hands and the people who believed that their labor could be counted. It's not magic, it's work. Ham looked at him. Then she took a honey gingerbread cookie out of her pocket, a whole one. She held it out to Dohan. Dohan took it, bit off half, held it back out. As always, you need it more. You're thinner. Hammy took the second half, bit off a piece. Tails poked out from under her cloak and swayed. So Ren approached, stood beside her silently, shoulder to shoulder. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the city, at the winch, at her sign. She said one thing. She said she needed a new project. Winches and pumps are fine. But she wants to build an elevator for people, not for people. One that will carry miners up and down so they don't have to climb the stairs. Dohan replied that it was a good idea and that the handle should be at her height. So Ren turned to him. Her eyes said it all. 2 years to 143 cups of tea. Every night spent over the blueprints. Every plaque with her name on it. Every time he told the craftsman, if she says so, do it. She didn't say a word. She just stood there. That was enough. Jem was the last to approach barefoot on the warm spring stone. She looked at Dohan and said she knew the answer to his question, the one he'd asked a year ago. What she loved. She said she loved the smell of fresh rock. And him in that order. Dohan looked at her. Then at the sky, a single sun. Then at the city, 30,000 names. Then at his hands empty. No pickaxe, bandaged with calluses that would never go away. He took out his notebook, opened a blank page, wrote it down. Year 3, spring. The root heart has been restored. The lean winter is over. Karhan's pickaxe has been returned. The lucky strike ability has been lost. The mine is operational. The city stands. The people are alive. All 30,000 to 147 of them. He closed the notebook, put it in his pocket, looked at the mine entrance, a dark rectangle in the rock. Familiar. Familiar. Down below was ore, silver, iron, monocrystals. Veins that would last 100 years. He no longer needed magic to find them. He knew where they were. He had always known. 6 years of mining in another world that couldn't be taken away. That couldn't be erased. It was his. Dohan turned to So-ren. He asked if she had a spare pickaxe, an ordinary one. No runes, no magic. Just a pickaxe. So-ren replied that there were 200 in the storeroom. Which one did he want? Dohan replied that he wanted the crookedest one. So-ren raised an eyebrow. Dohan explained that crooked pickaxes break faster, and he was used to breaking them. So-ren snorted. She almost laughed. Almost. Dohan took a pickaxe from the warehouse, an ordinary one. An iron one, without runes, heavy, cold. He gripped it more comfortably, and went into the mine. Because a miner with a pickaxe goes down the shaft. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's not a blessing from a dead god. It's work. And the work never ends. It never ends. It just goes on. Tunnel after tunnel. Name after name, day after day. The trash-picking miner from Taebaek who dug his way to the heart of the world. And fixed it with an ordinary pickaxe and a notebook in his pocket. It was work. And the work never ended. It went on through tunnels, names, seasons, and ledgers. It went on through bruised hands and rebuilt supports. It went on through every worker who stopped being invisible. Dohan no longer needed magic to prove he belonged. He had a mine beneath him, and people beside him. He had an ordinary pickaxe in one hand. He had a notebook full of names in the other. The trash miner from Taebaek had reached the heart of the world. And he fixed it by working one honest strike at a time.